Chapter 995. Boom! Icicles swept up from the top of Hellion Vivian's head like a storm. The holy light of Buddha was enough to restrict Hellion Vivian's movements. This time, the phoenix would definitely not be able to escape alive. However, what the woman did not expect was that, at that moment, Hellion Vivian suddenly raised her eyes. The cold cyclones flowing freely in the air seemed to listen to her command. Everyone said that the phoenix was bathed in fire. However, not many had actually seen it. It was a scorching heat that was emitted from the inside out. No one dared to approach it. The glaciers behind Hellion Vivian collapsed one after another. She was still holding the phoenix bone knife in her hand. As it flapped, her entire body was covered with a layer of fire. The fire was like the most ancient totem, weaving the boiling blood sea of Mount Buzhou and the fiery wings of the phoenix behind her. The woman from Tiandao saw this scene. Her eyes shook violently. "This is impossible. You are not as powerful as before. How can you still?" Hellion Vivian did not speak. She slowly pulled out the silver needles that were nailed to her. The blood on the back of her hand flowed to the ground, dyeing her windbreaker red. The phoenix feathers formed sparks in the air as clusters of them soared up with a crashing noise. Countless tiny snowflakes condensed into ice crystals that filled the air, refracting a resplendent ray of light that shone on Wei Wei's cold face. Her pupils were like a pure and holy twilight that could eliminate everything before her eyes. The woman wanted to escape, but she found that her two legs could no longer move. The flames that spread from her heels were burning her body. Almost in an instant, the ground shook violently. The phoenix's clear trace was enough to burn everything. The people from Tiandao and Buddhist Dao knew that it would be disadvantageous for them if they continued. They simply floated around and planned to wait for 2 days before making a move. Ho Zil, surrounded by snowy mountains, was left with nothing but emptiness after the battle. When Beligaju raised his head, he saw that Hellion Vivian was already standing in front of him. Her body was covered with cuts. She looked at him and smiled. "I'm back." Then he collapsed. Beligaju didn't know why he protected her. He just felt that it was very dazzling. Every wound on her body was dazzling. "I'm fine. I'm just too tired. I'll be fine after some rest." Beligaju tightened his grip on her fingers, and his eyes darkened. She seemed to have regained some of her strength and hugged his waist. Her voice was hoarse. "I never thought of trapping you." Beligaju didn't say anything. The evil aura made him irritated. "But she's right. You became like this because of me. Shouldn't I stay by your side?" Hellion Vivian put her head on Beligaju's chest and then fell asleep. He had completely exhausted his physical strength and suffered from altitude sickness. Just like what the holy monks had said, Phoenix had sacrificed her vitality to protect Beligaju. The tent was silent. A little bit of cold air began to invade from all directions. Beligaju didn't say a word as he placed Hellion Vivian in the coffin. Then he walked out of the tent. His black boots made a clear sound as he stepped on the snow. In the distance, the fairy who was on the verge of death saw Beligaju's figure, and her eyes suddenly lit up. Rip! A huge and resplendent flower of ice and snow bloomed on the fairy's chest. Its sharp and hard petals were extremely beautiful. They pierced through flesh and bone. Silver-white ice crystals that were like crazy vines pierced through the soles of her feet. They went all the way up her calves and thighs. Blood gushed out from her throat. She didn't even know why the man had made a move. Beligaju narrowed his blood-red eyes. He broke through the ground with a diamond-like coldness. "My soul? Do you think you have the right to make a move?" There was a loud bang. In the distance, 2 people from Tiandao were shaken to the ground. Blood flowed all over the ground. Bailey Jiaju stood there, his black robe fluttering in the wind. It was as light as a black smoke floating in the air, wrapping around his slender and powerful body. It turned out that although sunlight and him would cause harm, it was already weakening. It was obvious that his demonic nature was beginning to be able to cover up his spiritual nature. The situation was more serious than they had imagined. The people from both the divine and Buddhist paths thought that they could use this opportunity to eliminate Beligaju. But now they realized that no one could stop him. The demonization was already set in stone. After dealing with the people outside, Beligaju returned to the tent. He looked at Hellion Vivian in the coffin, who was riddled with wounds. His gaze was a little uncertain. His fingers automatically stroked her hair, but he smiled coldly. Stupid. If it was anyone else, they would have taken this opportunity to escape. But she was still stupid enough to stay and be his shield. This woman had no intelligence at all. Beligaju lowered his eyes and hugged her in his arms. His voice was faint. If even you don't have the right to stay by my side, who does? As a master, how can you be so unconfident? Hellion Vivian couldn't hear this sentence. She was in a deep sleep. She was in the right position, so she was even more so. Stupid, Beligaju said in a low voice again. He patted her back with one hand. The demons hiding in the darkness didn't know why, but the darkness on their king's body was suppressed again. But they knew very well that this was only temporary. Once the time was up, their king would swallow the whole human into his stomach. In fact, this was indeed the case, because in the next moment Beligaju had already started to plan how to eat people. When Hellion Vivian woke up again, she heard him whispering something in her ear. This was the unique hallucination of demons. It could make people reveal the deepest secrets in their hearts when they were unprepared. She looked at him and said with a tired voice, "There are still 5.5 days. It's easy to pass. Don't attack me when I'm unprepared. I can still help you deal with those Buddhists. You are indeed a little useful. But my master, aren't you overestimating yourself?" Beligaju reached out and pinched her chin. "Tell me your wish now. I can naturally deal with those Buddhists. It's just a few people and you're already so tired. How can you help me like this? Why don't I help you free, my dear master?" Many people think that it's very satisfying to be devoured by demons. In fact, if it's you, I will treat you very gently. After all, you are very delicious. Hellion Vivian coughed softly. Her head was also throbbing. In the face of Beligaju's words, she didn't reply. Instead, she hugged him and buried her face in his arms. She had already expected this result when she used her spiritual energy to balance him. She wanted to tell this person that soon, he would be able to return to his previous arrogant self. Chapter 996. But in the end, Hellion Vivian still didn't say anything. She suddenly remembered that when she was looking for his soul fragment, he was shouting to let her go, but his hand was still holding on to her. This time was different from that time. He had really forgotten about her. Even if he remembered, she was just a soul that had signed a contract with him. "I need to sleep. There's a lot of fresh blood in the wooden box outside. If you're hungry, you can open it and drink." Beligaju was very clear about the condition of Hellion Vivian's body. He bit open the blood bag and saw her breathing heavily at the side. He frowned. At night, Hellion Vivian's high fever became more serious. She seemed to have a fever, but also seemed to be coughing. After the wound was infected, without spiritual energy to heal, it would indeed cause this result. However, the same thing was that demons wouldn't attack such prey. Demons liked to raise the most. If they wanted to eat someone, they would definitely wash that person from head to toe. So that night, the two of them were very safe. Beligaju didn't like to lie with others. He let go of the coffin and lay down in the tent with his arms behind his head. There was suddenly a blanket on his body. When he opened his eyes, he was already warm. The person in his arms was still very warm. Could even be said that her body temperature was too high. Beligaju frowned and then smiled wickedly. "Throw yourself into my arms? I'm a little cold. I think I have a fever." Hellion Vivian hugged his waist and said in a deep voice, "Since I can't infect you, then hug me to sleep. You can't not cover yourself with a blanket." As a demon, Beligaju couldn't refuse his master's request. Only this woman was so stupid. She could clearly order him to do things, but she didn't let him do anything. "My master, you can order me." Beligaju lowered his head and kissed her neck, but in the next second he frowned. Her body was too hot. Humans would most likely die if they did that. Beligaju lifted her face and said in a harsh tone, "Don't sleep. You brought so many things." You must have brought the medicine that you humans take. Where is it? I'll get it for you. Blood bag, below. After Hellion Vivian finished speaking, she closed her eyes. Beligaju didn't waste any time. He stretched out his left hand and grabbed the wooden box. He flipped to the bottom and took out a box of powder. Thinking that this thing should be washed with hot water, a glint flashed across his eyes, and the bucket of water beside him began to heat up. After preparing the medicine, Beligaju wanted to feed Hellion Vivian, but in the end, he felt that it was troublesome for a human to fall ill, so he took a big gulp and kissed Hellion Vivian on the lips. The next day, his fever finally subsided. Of course, Hellion Vivian knew that it was impossible for him to recover so quickly with just that little medicine. Her body was still very vain. She didn't know what Beligaju did to make her body temperature not so high. Hellion Vivian was sweating all over and her windbreaker was stained with blood. She didn't need to look to know how pathetic she was. But what she didn't expect was that after sleeping for a while, the tent looked like it had been robbed. Especially the water and wooden box that she had carefully prepared, they were no longer in their original state. Things were overturned everywhere, and most of them were steaks and chocolates on the ground. Hellion Wei Wei massaged her temples as she felt a headache coming on. She pulled the blanket and stood up. When she opened the tent, she saw the most beautiful sunrise. In Hozil, there were 3,000 people on the snow line. The man stood in the dazzling light. His face was as beautiful as an ice sculpture. His long hair, which was covered in snow, was scattered by his side. Under his black windbreaker, his feet stepped on the snow without a care. Black fog was emitted from his body. It was a darkness that could compete with the light. Hellion Vivian's heart suddenly sank. He was not even afraid of the sunlight. That also meant that he was one step closer to becoming a demon. As if he was aware of her existence, Beligaju slowly walked back. He reached out and grabbed Hellion Vivian. His slightly exposed fangs rubbed her lips. "Good morning, my master. The aura in your body seems to have weakened a lot. Those people from the upper realm have really done a good thing. Even if I don't know what the wish is, I can eat you in advance and leave this cold and lifeless place. You'll definitely feel cold standing outside." Hellion Vivian avoided the sarcasm in his tone and then held both of his hands. She lowered her head and blew 2 breaths. Her attitude was natural. "Is it warmer?" Beligaju's fingers moved. When the temperature that did not belong to a demon came from his fingertips, his chest felt empty. That emptiness made him want to destroy something more. However, he still resisted. After all, it was daytime, not nighttime. When the 4th night came, his demonic aura would be further released. During the day, it was time for him to rest. No matter how vicious Beligaju was, he would always be gentle to Hellion Wei Wei. This was the nature of a demon. He was elegant and indifferent to outsiders. But he was patient enough to treat his master. Not to mention a master like Hellion Vivian. She was different from all the humans he had met before, because no one would hold his hand and give him warmth. Some people felt that he did not need it, and some people did not dare. And this person seemed to be really not worried about being swallowed by him. "Thank you for yesterday's medicine." Hellion Vivian hugged him. She did not know why, but ever since she came here, she wanted to hug him more and more. "I'm very happy." Beligaju's thin lips were close to her ear. His voice was still pleasant to hear. "This kind of thing is what I should do. An unhealthy body will not be too delicious to eat. Okay, go eat something. Your body needs these." "So that's why." Hellion Vivian's voice became very low in an instant. Beligaju chuckled. "What else did you think it was?" "Yes, what else could it be?" Hellion Vivian lowered her eyes. Although she told herself not to care, it still hurt a little. "It's nothing. It's just that when you made the medicine, you made the tent look like it had been ransacked. It's a little strange." Beligaju paused. Indeed, according to the requirements of a demon for beauty, everything should be done in a calm and unhurried manner. At that time, he seemed to have forgotten to care about that. However, it was just a small matter in the end. What Beligaju cared about was when he could dig out the heart of the person in front of him and eat it bite by bite. Chapter 997. Demons ate from the heart. Therefore, Beligaju couldn't help but hold Hellion Vivian's soft hand. Master, do you really not need me to warm you up with my body? No need. Hellion Vivian pushed him away, her eyes clear. If you really don't have anything to do, help me fry a piece of steak. Steak! Beligaju snorted. Human food. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. So, you know how to cook? No. Beligaju's voice was very calm. Hellion Vivian nodded. Then today's order is to fry a piece of steak for me. I'll watch you from the side. Beligaju smiled. Master, are you sure you want to waste your order on such an unimportant thing? This is very important to me. Hellion Vivian looked at his insufferably arrogant appearance and felt her heart soften. She turned her head and kissed the back of his hand. I haven't eaten your food yet. As a demon, Beligaju certainly wouldn't refuse his master's request. He curled his thin lips and said in a magnetic voice, As you wish, master. It had to be said that Beligaju would do everything perfectly. The steak was ready-made. Once the things in the packaging were removed, placed in the pot, and added oil, it would be able to fry a good steak. Beligaju walked over with a plate. Just like how Hellion Vivian served him breakfast before, this time he poured milk for her. The cutlery wasn't perfect, so Hellion Vivian skipped the tedious details. She ate a mouthful of meat and a mouthful of milk, but she ate a little slowly. In fact, her appetite wasn't very good. Eating steak wasn't the best choice after just being sick. She just wanted to replenish her energy and for convenience, forced herself to eat 2 mouthfuls and some fruits. Beligaju looked at her from the side and frowned. Then, he took the plate away and poured all the meat into a plastic bag. Then, he took out a tissue and wiped his fingers. If you don't want to eat, then force yourself to eat. Don't you know what's good for you humans when you're sick? Hellion Vivian paused. She didn't think too much. Besides, did she really want that certain highness, who didn't touch the sun and spring water, to make soup for her? There were ingredients. The radishes and chicken were wrapped to withstand the cold. What else are in the boxes you brought with you? Beligaju's voice was very indifferent. Since you plan to stay here for 7 days, it shouldn't be just this meat. Hellion Vivian watched the man leave this sentence and began to rummage through the boxes. She finally understood why the tent had become like that. Looking at Beligaju's side profile cooking, she felt that it was a very beautiful thing. Although his eyes were still shining with a bloodthirsty light, his tall and slender back view was still reassuring. The tip of the demon's tongue didn't seem to be very sensitive to human food, and Beligaju couldn't taste the saltiness of the soup. After cooking for a while, he scooped out a little with a spoon for Hellion Vivian to taste. He gave off a very serious feeling. Hellion Vivian had never doubted that Her Highness was a good man. Even if he had become a demon, everything he did was just to be able to eat her well. However, looking at Beligaju frowning and staring at the fire, Hellion Vivian easily fell asleep. After tossing and turning for a long time, when the fire was finally turned off, the person who was going to feed the soup sat there and fell asleep. Beligaju stopped what he was doing and bent down to look at Hellion Vivian. Then he slowly bent down, picked her up, and put her into the coffin. Then he walked out of the tent. At this time, a mountaineering team was resting in the lee of the glacier. Several members sat around the smokeless stove and were heating special dehydrated beef to replenish their strength. Everyone hurry up and eat. After eating, we will go east and see the Tibetan antelopes drinking water. She was sitting by the stove. There were not many people who dared to be a guide in Hozil. After all, this place had not been civilized. A mountaineer adjusted the camera and said without raising his head, I have just seen the east. There is nothing special. The scenery is almost the same as the one we walked all the way here. I want to go from the west, towards the snow mountain. I heard that you can see the glacier and Mount Everest there. Jashi, take us to the west. Yes, Jashi, go to the west. We all want to see the snow mountain closer. The person who said this was a female mountaineer. She was fully dressed and wore a pair of goggles on her head. She lowered her head and took 2 breaths of oxygen. Don't worry. We are all scientists. We will not do anything to harm ourselves. The technician also turned his head. If it really doesn't work, we can still pay more. This time, we came out to better understand Hozil. If we don't photograph the snow mountain and the glacier, the information will be missing. We are now working on a project in the Tibetan area. Jia Shi, I hope you can support this work. I am very sorry, my honorable guest. Jia Shi said this sentence in Tibetan. Then, he realized something and switched to Chinese. We have our own rules. Allah told us that the most taboo thing to do in Hozil is to go near the snow mountain. This is not a matter of money. I brought you here so I will bring everyone back safely. Moreover, I promised my boss that I will not go near the west during this period of time. So I am very sorry. The female mountaineer had a pair of binoculars around her neck. She raised it up and laughed. Jia Shi, everything is negotiable. Do you think that the price is too low? We can all increase it. Don't tell us the story of Allah. If the snow mountain is really so dangerous, there will not be a tent there. There are obviously people there. There is a tent beside the snow mountain? The technician was excited. He raised his binoculars and looked in the direction that the female mountaineer said. How is it possible? There is really a tent. What kind of people lived there? Are they local Tibetans? Didn't they say that this is a no-man's land with no signal and no people? Just when everyone wanted to take a look, Jia Shi knocked the binoculars out of the technician's hands. What are you doing? The technician jumped up as if he had been stung by a bee. Jia Shi, do you know how expensive this thing is? Jia Shi ignored his words and still did not let them see. We can't go to the west of the snow mountain. Let's go back the way we came. Don't go any further. Everyone was in an uproar when they heard this. The technician sneered. Why go back the way we came? We just want to go to the snow mountain to have a look. Chapter 998. Jia Shi looked at him. His Chinese was still stiff, but he clearly expressed his displeasure. I once said that you have to listen to me when you reach Hozil. The original arrangement was to go to the east. If you don't want to continue, just turn around and go down the mountain. This matter is over. Going to the west is not within the agreed range. I won't accept it. The technician still wanted to argue. The female member stood in front of him with a camera around her neck. If it's because of your belief, you can choose not to go there. This is not against the rules. No, in my opinion, this is against the rules. Jia Shi was very insistent. The female member smiled and shook her head. That's why you Tibetans are so stubborn. But we are different. As long as there is enough oxygen, there is no reason to stop us from going to the snow peak. As she spoke, the female member turned her head. Everyone, get ready. Those who want to go to the snow peak can follow us. We have instruments in our hands that can accurately distinguish between north and south. Those who are timid can follow Jia Shi back. After all, it is understandable that no one stays behind to take the risk. This mountaineering team was too young. The consequence of being too young was that it was easy to forget to listen to other people's opinions when they encountered the scenery that they liked. In Hozil, a Tibetan was worth more than 10 instruments. This was nature. Only those who lived here knew where to go and where not to go. Jia Shi was betrayed by his friends and no one listened to him anymore. However, he could not leave these people alone. The wolf dog ran happily behind Jia Shi, but it still did not want to go to the snow mountain in the west. This meant that it was very obvious. In this land, animals were often more sensitive than humans. The wind and snow continued. The higher they went, the colder it became. At the same time, it was accompanied by a strong altitude reaction. Several members of the team took turns to take oxygen after walking for a while. Just like what they said, it was very convenient to carry a device with you wherever you go. In fact, it was more tiring to walk on the plateau more than 6,000 feet above sea level. They thought that the snow mountain was very close, but it took them 5 hours to walk. When they arrived at their destination, the sun began to set. People who lived in Tibet all knew that. Do not walk outside at night. If it was too dark, you must go back to a place with people. This was the rule. Once again, Jia Shi stood up and tried to get them to return to the team. At night, there will be wolves and avalanches. These glaciers might even melt. Do you understand? The inspector held the camera with one hand, and only the beauty of this place was left in his eyes. It's really a paradise on Earth. Why didn't I discover such a beautiful place earlier? Jiaxi clenched his fists. Why didn't these people listen to him? The female team member was polite, but her words were always a little hypocritical. Jiaxi, you have a dog by your side, and we all have torches. I have also played in the wild before. They are just wolves, and they are afraid of fire. That's because you haven't seen a pack of wolves. Jiaxi blushed and said in Tibetan, "We must go back immediately." The female team member disagreed. When she picked up the binoculars, she caught a glimpse of something. Tents. There really are tents there. Jiaxi also paused for a moment because in his impression, no one would dare to camp here. Even they would not choose to spend the night in the no-man's land because it was too dangerous. After all, the wolves in Hozil were much more ferocious than these people imagined. For a moment, Jiaxi thought of the employer who dragged the coffin into the night. Could it be that the tent was hers? Before Jiaxi could stop them, the mountaineering team had already strode toward the tent. At this time, something strange happened. The wolf dog that Jiaxi brought refused to take another step forward. Instead, it seemed to have foreseen something terrible and curled up into a ball, shivering. Look, what is that? The female team member breathed heavily, and her eyes were full of amazement. There was no wolf pack here, and there was no danger as the guide had said. On the contrary, 3,000 meters above the snow line, there was a man sitting beside a glacier cliff. He had an excellent figure and was wearing a cloak. He was like a silent and valiant snow leopard, only revealing a pair of deep eyes. He was so handsome that it was as if he had walked out of a manga. Is he a local? The female team member guessed excitedly. She walked forward and said in Tibetan, "Jiaxi, here you are." Baligaju listened and tilted his head, revealing a charming smile and a bewitching voice that demons were best at. "You smell so good." The female team member was stunned and blushed uncontrollably. At this time, she did not realize that Baligaju had another meaning when he said that she smelled good. She thought that it was the essential oil of the perfume on her body that had played a role in it. "You can speak Chinese?" The female team member smiled again. "That's great. Just now, our guide said that there was no one in this place and it was very dangerous. He told us not to come. It seems that there is no danger here at all. Instead, there is a handsome man." Baligaju lowered his head, and the cloak cleverly blocked his completely black nails. He stuck out the tip of his tongue and licked it. The corner of his mouth lifted into an elegant arc. "It's a fragrance that I haven't smelled for a long time. Can easily make people fall." The female team member's face became even hotter, but when she saw the wine glass in his hand, she could not help but be curious. How can there be such red wine? Won't the wine on the plateau freeze? This is not wine. Baligaju did not raise his head and smiled. This is blood, very fresh blood. His voice was very low and even pleasant to the ears. However, when it reverberated through the endless snowy mountains, it caused everyone to fall silent. After a while, the female team member smiled awkwardly. You are really humorous." "Humorous?" Baligaju raised his head. His silver hair fluttered in the darkness and his fangs were slightly exposed, making him look extremely evil. The female team member's face immediately changed. She took a step back and wanted to escape. However, it was too late. A mocking smile appeared in Baligaju's eyes. Then, he moved. It was the kind of movement that flashed by as fast as the speed of light. He, who should have been sitting in the snow, appeared in front of the female team member in the blink of an eye. His left hand firmly gripped her neck, and the wind blew his silver hair into a mess. His scarlet eyes no longer had the usual laziness, the occasional evil charm, and the impatience he had when facing Hellion Vivian. There was only killing intent and coldness. The most important step in the demonization of a demon was the rendering of human desires. And today, Baligaju had finally completed this step ahead of time. Chapter 999. Save me, Zhang Ming, Li Yan, Come and save me. The female team member was trembling all over as she screamed shrilly. However, the team members who had boarded the ship were already scared out of their wits. How could they go forward? They all dropped their cameras and ran away. No one dared to look back, as if there was an unknown monster behind them. Beligaju smiled, and the black gas lingered around him. This is the reaction that a human should have. Fear, betrayal, it has been like this since the beginning. Didn't you blush when you saw me just now? Why, I just started to show my original appearance and you are already scared. Ha ha ha. No, don't. In the tent, the sick Hellion Vivian suddenly woke up. She arched her body and rushed toward the glacier like an arrow released from the bow. There was a loud bang. The phoenix blade slashed out a fierce flame. Hellion Vivian grabbed the female team member's arm and said in a low voice, "Jew, stop. Don't steal my prey and don't get in my way." In the wind and snow, Beligaju did not let go of the woman in his hand. There was no expression on his handsome face. "Otherwise, I will kill you too." Hellion Vivian did not speak, nor did she give in. The smile on Bailey Jiaju's face deepened. "So, do you want to be my enemy now, my naive master?" The cold wind suddenly tightened, and the snow swept past like a sharp blade, lifting the corners of their clothes at the same time. Hellion Vivian knew that once a human appeared at this time, the demon in his body would be completely activated. However, Hellion Vivian did not expect such an accident to happen. She tilted her head and looked at Jiaxi. Jiaxi did not escape, but his face was extremely pale. He suddenly remembered that night when he received Hellion Vivian, he saw a pure black coffin. She said that she would wait for a chance to let him see the person she liked. He always thought that it was an unfulfilled wish, but now it seemed that the man in the coffin was a demon. Jiaxi didn't know what to do. He was very worried. Hellion Vivian turned around and looked at Beligaju. Her voice was light, but her breath was still warm. "I don't want to be your enemy. It's just that I don't like you touching other women. Do you think I'm just saying that I like you? Beligaju, don't forget that I'm the one who made the contract with you. You're mine." Beligaju was still thinking about what kind of angle to stab his fangs into the female member's neck. But now all the thoughts in his mind were gone. All that was left in front of him was that stubborn and good-looking face. How could there be such a person in this world? She was smart and pure. She could speak so openly, so pure that only the instinct to possess her was left. It was an uncontrollable desire that came from the depths of his body. Green veins protruded from his handsome and resolute face, and his eyes were faintly discernible with hostility. A strong desire to, "I want more." The desire in his heart kept rising. The taste of this person made him crazy. The thirst in his blood made him want to pounce on her and devour her soul. His remaining reason restrained him, telling him that he couldn't do that. But his sharp fangs couldn't be retracted. He had to eat something. Bailey Jiaju turned his head and fiercely bit in the direction of the female team member. Hellion Vivian raised her hand and used her arm to replace the female member's neck. The pain instantly spread to the entire body. When the female member saw that she was saved, she began to flee in panic, not caring about what Hellion Vivian would do. The first thing to do when the demon was aroused was to consume. But just like what Hellion Vivian said, she didn't like him to be tainted with other people's scent. She didn't want to see his hands stained with blood. In Hellion Vivian's heart, this man had always been the young man she saw on Mountain Tenya. He was clean, upright, and unapproachable. Only such a person was not afraid of gods and Buddhas, and was arrogant and independent. After the young man left, Hellion Vivian didn't go there to eat buns for a long time. Such a person was, in fact, very gentle. He didn't reject her, and even brought her to many places in the future. He said more than once that he wanted to lock himself up, but he was the one who gave her the most freedom and companionship. In the past, she used to talk to Bodhi, and there was no response. She didn't know how to communicate with others, and was very serious in everything she did. Every time she went to his temple, her hands would be wet. The venerables of Buddhism would avoid her when they saw her, and only he would frown and hold her hand to wash her hands. She was a boring person who didn't know anything, and when she crossed out the things that she had to do every day, he would indulge her. But at that time he had a pile of things to deal with. Get lost. Beligaju's voice was very cold. His fangs were still stained with Hellion Vivian's blood, but she didn't exist in his eyes at all. His eyes were fixed on the female team member not far away, and the strong murderous aura caused the sky to be filled with frightening dark clouds. Hellion Vivian didn't move, of course. Countless black fog rose behind Beligaju, and his tone was extremely cold. My naive master, you should learn from normal humans. Look at what they do, and if you do the same, I won't hate you so much. You're right, if you stay by my side, I don't know how many times happier I will be. You're the one who restrained me, so I'll say it again. Get lost. I want to hunt. Hate. When she heard this word, Hellion Vivian's heart, which didn't have much strength, clenched fiercely. She raised her head, looked at the man who was about to complete his demonization, and hugged him without hesitation. Her voice was a little hoarse from the pain. Now I understand what you said before. I really want to lock you up and not let anyone see you. Don't eat other women. I'll give up using my spiritual energy to resist, and you'll easily suck me dry. I'm the one you want the most, isn't it? Of course. After Beligaju heard Hellion Vivian, he smiled evilly. He reached out and lifted Hellion Vivian's chin and kissed her lips. He was completely heartless like a demon. If you're willing to give yourself to me, I won't let myself suffer and eat those inferior souls. After saying that, he lowered his head and fiercely bit Hellion Vivian's throat. His black nails cut open her clothes and pierced her skin. Every bite was like a kiss, but it was real damage. He gently licked the blood and coaxed naturally, My delicious master, now can you tell me what your wish is? Chapter 1000. The demonization was complete. Beligaju, who was exuding a black fog, was like a red spider lily in full bloom in the demon world. He was incomparably handsome. He sucked the blood and raised his head slightly. The lines of his jawbone were like a quiet bay. Behind him, huge wings spread out without warning. The black feathers that symbolized sin, darkness, and greed fell one after another. The demon song played. Together with his wings, they slowly flew, as if they could embrace the stars in the sky. Hellion Vivian knew that she couldn't stop it. Enduring the pain, she reached out and wrapped her arms around his waist. Just like before, she wanted to give him warmth, but her breath became very weak. At that moment, even her lips were pale. Only the tears in her eyes were very gentle. I want you to be happy and not be alone. This is my wish. Hearing this, Beligaju's body suddenly shook. No one had ever made such a wish for him. He remembered the day of the fall. He was thrown into the flames of hell and endured unbearable pain. The real fall only began in the third hell. His soul would be completely crushed. Every bone seemed to be in pain. No one would think for him. But at that time, what was he thinking? Revenge? Bailey Jiaju's stiff fingers tightened around Hellion Wei Wei in his arms. The light in his eyes gradually condensed into a single spot, converging into a blood-red pattern. The softness in his arms made him stop moving. Something important was disappearing little by little with the blood flowing out of her chest. It was a feeling that he hadn't felt for a long time. She lay in his arms. Her pale face had long lost its original vitality. She was like an obedient puppet. In the past, he had thought of destroying her countless times. But the moment she really lost all her warmth, he felt an unprecedented emptiness. Was this feeling good or bad? No one would be able to restrain him anymore, and his chest would no longer be as restless as before. He had wanted so much to get rid of this feeling. If he could finally get rid of it, and she would never appear in front of him again. Why did he feel like he was drained of all his strength? As her blood seeped in, something surged up bit by bit. There was one person who never let him live in peace. He had been very shrewd since he was young. He always wore a kasaya that did not fit his figure and the sleeves were not right. However, he liked to run around Mountain Tenya with water in his hands. He did not look like a little monk at all. She was like a cat. After seeing you, She would first throw you to steamed bun and observe you for a while. She would only approach you when you were good to her. But later on, you realized that she wasn't a cat, but a canine, giving without expecting anything in return. It was a look of complete trust. There was also the gentleness of putting all her eggs in one basket. She will take whatever you say seriously. She was obviously very smart, but she would clumsily lie on the table and carefully remember what the two of them did. Only then did Beligaju remember. When he fell from the heavens and became a demon, he never thought about revenge. Instead, he thought about his little phoenix. Without him, would she be bullied in Buddhism? During the twilight of the gods, what he thought the most was that she would push him down, then lean into his arms and hug him domineeringly. It was such an important thing. How could he forget? Beligaju's black-gloved fingers dug into his palms. He hurriedly wiped the blood for the person in his arms. No one could see his expression clearly. He hugged Hellion Vivian and knelt down on his knees. With one hand hanging down, his entire head was lowered. This person did not kneel to the heavens or the earth. He was not afraid of gods or Buddha, but at this moment he was like a defeated army. Huge cracks appeared on the glacier around him one after another. Countless man-eating black crows rose in an instant. Big birds flew across the snow mountains, raising their heads and crying. Suddenly, a hoarse voice rang out between the heavens and the earth, spreading to every corner of the world. In this world where demons and monsters were running rampant, all the ghosts and monsters trembled in fear and involuntarily revealed their true forms. That was the roar of the leader of thousands of demons. That was the sadness that reached the depths of the human heart. That was the hatred that could penetrate the 18 layers of hell. The roar shook the gate of hell. The reapers could not help but tremble. They looked at each other. The chains in their hands that were used to bind souls were shattered by the invisible devil energy. In the car shop, Hellion Chinchin, who was washing her hair, suddenly sat up straight. She did not care about Bailey Shangxia, who was still flushing her behind, and ran out. Bailey Shangxia pulled him back and patted him on the back with his blackened fingernails. He did not say a word and looked very cool. Hellion Chinchin suddenly realized that her brother was the most uncomfortable at this moment. She hugged Bailey Shangxia and said in a muffled voice, "It will be okay. Believe in beauty, Hellion." Okay. Bailey Shangxia did not tell Hellion Chinchin that his change meant that his father had lost his humanity. Even if something really happened, he had to stabilize himself and take good care of his younger brother. Hellion Chinchin also did not let Bailey Shangxia worry. She even knew that it was more important to help her brother hide his identity at this time. She covered Bailey Shangxia's ears with her small hands. After entering the car shop, she took a big windbreaker and covered Bailey Shangxia with it. The two little people snuggled up to each other and sat in the corner. They had never been so well behaved before. The sun gradually set and the sky was full of splendor. It was the real time to meet the devil. Beligaju carried Hellion Vivian and walked towards Jiaxi. His long hair fluttered in the dark. His footsteps were crisp and clear. It was the sound of the ground being crushed. She could no longer feel anything from this man. Pride, elegance, contempt, mockery, weakness, and cruelty. He just walked. His long and thick eyelashes were stained with snow. Jiaxi was dumbfounded. He did not know how to react at all. He could not believe that all the glaciers around him had collapsed, but he was the only one who was still intact. Jiaxi would never know that Hellion Vivian's last glance saved his life alone. No one could have predicted that this would be the result. The climbers who were eventually buried in the overwhelming avalanche never thought that they would lose their lives because they didn't listen to others' advice. If it were not for the female climber's approach and the dirty thoughts in her heart, Beligaju might not have been demonized in advance. But everyone knew that things would eventually come to this point. At night, under 90 or 80 miles of snow, the red spider lilies were in full swing, floating on a dark river. It was indescribably beautiful. Chapter 1001. In the river, a small boat suddenly appeared. This river was called the Styx River. It was the river of life in the underworld. Souls that couldn't ascend to heaven floated on it, like rising clouds. Beligaju stood at the bow of the boat, wearing a black cloak. He quietly held the bamboo pole and lowered his head to look at Hellion Vivian in the boat. She didn't open her eyes, but he could hear her voice. "Where is this?" she asked. Beligaju smoothed her messy long hair. His slender straight face had an unprecedented gentleness. "The Styx River." Then, his thin lips fell on her forehead. That small face still showed no signs of waking up, and there was no grief. It was just very quiet, so quiet that it was peaceful and even smiling. The place where demons devour souls. Hellion Wei Wei couldn't see anything as she was immersed in a black fog. The only thing she could feel was his slightly cold lips, carrying a unique chill as he comforted her. Hellion Vivian asked again, "Are you going to start eating my souls now? They seem to be leaving my body." "Shoo." He stretched out his hand and pressed his finger on her pale, thin lips. "Don't talk. Sleep for a while. You need to rest." In her deep sleep, Hellion Vivian sighed. "Okay. Good girl." He always treated her in the most doting way. Even when he was about to devour her, he still treated her with the same gentleness. Beligaju stretched out his hand and put Hellion Vivian in his arms. Her beautiful upper body was naked. The black cloak that was originally covering her outside had become her protection against the cold. But Hellion Vivian didn't want to sleep. She still wanted to talk to him. But just like what Beligaju said, she had no strength left. If it wasn't for the extremely low temperature in Hozil, she was afraid that she would have died directly in the snowy glacier and wouldn't have dragged on until now. Hellion Vivian realized that her light of Buddha was weakening. Soon, she would fall to the bottom of the Styx River like many creatures. The only difference was that while other souls could reincarnate, she would disappear forever. No one knew what Beligaju wanted to do, and the messengers in charge of escorting the undead felt even more miserable. They didn't know why a certain highness would appear at the intersection of the underworld and the demon world. In the past, Beligaju had always disdained the underworld. He liked cleanliness, so he would never come to the underworld, which was full of undead. What was going on this time? If they knew that he was here, these undead wouldn't dare to go over, let alone reincarnate. Even the evil spirits buried in the 18 levels of hell began to tremble and wanted to run away from home. If they did not think of a way to get a certain person to leave, Hades would definitely fall into an unprecedented panic. What is he doing here? Fight? The tall king of hell picked up the judge with one hand. There was only displeasure on his wild and handsome face. The judge stammered, It doesn't look like it, but if someone gets close to him, he'll probably go crazy." "I'm not afraid of him going crazy. I've never liked this pretty boy, so I'll get rid of him today." The king of hell threw his subordinate aside and walked out with a sinister smile. The woman sitting behind him crossed her legs. "Did you ask me to come to the lower realm so that I can watch you fight with the emperor?" "Of course not." The king of hell immediately changed his direction and sat back down obediently. The corners of his lips curled up seductively. "It's just that little Seven has been missing you a lot recently and has been asking to see you." The judge. Why did the big bosses of the demon world and the underworld like to use their sons as an excuse when they want to trick their wives? Also, my lord, don't smile while talking, your tail is already wagging. I can't bear to look at it. But the emperor must have met with some trouble to come here at this time. The woman fell into deep thought. You should go and help him. The king of hell thought to himself, it's fine if I don't take the opportunity to kill him, but you expect me to help him? No. Two very simple words. The woman looked at him for a while. All right, then there's nothing to talk about between us. You. The king of hell fiercely bit his fangs. I understand. I'll go now. The judge. My lord, can you have some integrity? You weren't like this before, my lord. Also, are you sure you won't lose control and accidentally fight with his highness? After all, he's your love rival for thousands of years. The king of hell couldn't take it anymore. So he left the sect and sent a ghost messenger to check on the situation. The ghost messenger said that Beligaju came with a boat, and that the wisdom king of Phoenix's body was on the boat. The king of hell basically understood what was going on. In a sense, The king of hell hoped that Beligaju and Hellion Vivian could be together forever. This way, that pretty boy wouldn't have to endanger other people's families. Therefore, the king of hell generously asked the ghost messengers to lead the dead souls to other places first, so that they wouldn't continue to jump into the river Styx. The red spider lilies spread on the banks of the river Styx. Everyone said that it symbolized misfortune and despair. But even so, it couldn't stop people from yearning for it. Legend said that it grew in places where souls were the most concentrated. When the breeze blew, one could faintly hear a song. That was the singing of mermaids. Don't think that mermaids are beautiful things. That's right, they were indeed very beautiful. They had the most ethereal voices and clean faces in the world, gentle and pitiful. When they looked into your eyes, you couldn't help but agree to anything they wanted. However, when you agreed, they would bare their sharp teeth and quickly drag you to the deepest part of the river, gnawing on you until you didn't have a single piece left. Beligaju walked over. The mermaids floated to the surface and obediently made a path for him. He placed Hellion Vivian in the sea of flowers. His cold eyes stared at the mermaids that he summoned. With an indifferent expression, he gave a concise order: "Sing until she wakes up." The mermaids didn't dare to disobey his order. Their eyes were intoxicated with his elegant and cold face. They placed their hands in front of them and gently opened their mouths. A beautiful Sanskrit song followed, blowing the sea of flowers. Legend said that the mermaid's song could summon souls. But in reality, this probability was very low. Beligaju lowered his head and bit his wrist, placing it on Hellion Vivian's thin lips. He waited until drops of blood dyed her pale lips red. Then, with a splash, he jumped into the river Styx without a care. The mermaids were shocked. Some even forgot their own song. After all, their king, who was obsessed with cleanliness, never got close to the river Styx, let alone touch the water of the river Styx. But now he was actually standing in the river Styx, enduring the filth and inhuman coldness. He lowered his head to fish for something, looking very persistent. Chapter 1002. Bailey Jiaju turned his head sideways. The light in his eyes coldly swept past their faces one by one, carrying an extremely deep cold light. Only then did the mermaids retract their gazes and concentrate on their task. A clear and ethereal voice came little by little from the surface of the river, rising up layers of thin fog. Only at this time could the naked eye see the souls sinking to the bottom of the river. In order to find them, Beligaju must hide the demonic nature in his body. The temperature of the river Styx was extremely low, and a mortal body could not withstand the bone-piercing cold at all. This caused the rebellious wraiths to have second thoughts. Eat him, eat him. He went down the river Styx, and won't have any magic power in a short time. They wanted to take this opportunity to clean up Beligaju's body. After all, this man's blood was an absolute tonic for them. Such a situation would not happen a second time. It was indeed so. Hellion Vivian would never know. For her, that arrogant and aloof man revealed his weakness for the first time. The sharp claws of the wraiths pierced towards his back. With his ability, even without the demonic nature, he could completely avoid it. However, he just turned his body slightly, protecting the soul that he had just fished up in his hand, and allowed the sharp claws to pierce through his left shoulder and into his shoulder bone. The evil spirits laughed as if they had succeeded. However, before they had enough of the wonderful taste of the blood, their whole bodies seemed to be burned by a raging fire, and they wailed as they turned into fireworks in the air. It turned out that even Beligaju's blood was full of demonic nature that no undead could bear. That powerful force was sick to a certain extent, and it was not something they could bear at all. After seeing this scene, the other evil spirits who originally wanted to get a share of the meal all paled. They should not take a step forward at all, and could only tremble and beg Beligaju to spare them. However, this time Beligaju did not seem to see their existence. He did not cut them up, nor did he ask them to scram. He just bent down and continued to focus on fishing something. He didn't seem to feel any pain at all. Blood dripped down his shoulder. He carefully held the second soul, not letting his blood stain the soul strands. No one had seen Beligaju like this. His usually beautiful fingers were red from the cold, and there were many black bruises on them. But he did not care at all. He was so serious, so persistent, so afraid of missing something, and stood in the river Styx for a full 4 hours. Only when the water from the Styx River dyed the ends of his hair and his whole body was wet did he come ashore. His eyes stared motionlessly at Helion Wei Wei, who was lying in the sea of flowers. His whole body was cold, and something in his heart seemed to be gradually freezing. The mermaids were still singing, like the sound of a guqin pouring out in torrents. But there seemed to be an unknown flame burning in Beligaju's chest, rampaging inside his body, and could not find a way out. She did not wake up. She did not wake up. His favorite red spider lily bloomed beside the Nirvana River in full swing. He finally got his wish and obtained a complete rebirth. However, the person who always held him in the palm of her hand and protected him would never come back. I want you to be happy and not be alone anymore. This is my wish. Why didn't he stop earlier when he heard those words? Bailey Jiaju moved his Adam's apple with difficulty. He clenched his fists until they were covered in blood, but he didn't move at all. It was as if his entire person had melted into the darkness, blending into the night. The night wind blew quietly, in the swaying shadow of the sea of flowers. Beligaju still stood in the same place. Drop by drop, the blood on his body fell on the white snow. Except for the day he fell when he was immersed in the chaos for a few days. He, who had always been cold and noble, had never been in such a sorry state like this. His upbringing did not allow him to do anything beneath his dignity. But now, he lowered his eyes and buried his head in Helion Vivian's chest. He really wanted this person to wake up, no matter what she wanted him to do. He slammed his hand on the ground, and black feathers fluttered down. With him as the center, countless resentful spirits were affected and turned into ashes in an instant. The huge resentful energy above the Nirvana River was cut open by the black smoke. The boundary of the Grand Barrier was broken, and it shattered into pieces. At this moment, the mermaids stopped singing, and all of them floated to the surface of the river. It was not because of anything else, but because they had never seen that high and mighty man cry one day. Everyone knew that no matter if it was a human, a god, or a Buddha, they would cry when they were born. Only Beligaju, who was born from the chaos, came to this world with a smile. The corners of his mouth curled up as if he was born with a rebellious expression. Such a person was actually shedding tears here. Not only the mermaids, but even the spirits of the dead within a few hundred miles stopped floating. Beligaju's eyes were filled with red marks, and the dark aura emitted from his body went straight to Buddha's Amitabha mountain. The 3 realms were shaken, but no one could do anything to Beligaju. The Hades shook violently, and the king of hell could not stand steadily. He simply took the opportunity to hug his beloved woman. The judge could not stand it anymore, and accidentally fell into the 4th prison. The entire Hades was in chaos, and many spirits of the dead began to choose their path in panic, and the reapers were swayed. In the human world, Bailey Shangxia clumsily hugged a little girl who was only a head shorter than him, and walked in the snow. There was no longer any of his previous hostility, and his whole body was noble and cold. He stood in the coffin shop that he was most unwilling to go to. Qing Chen was quietly nestled in his arms, and her little face had lost all color. She was lying on Bailey Shangxia's shoulder, and her lips were pale. The owner of the coffin shop had a single word: Bing. He wore a black suit and held a black notebook in his hand. He wore flat glasses on the bridge of his nose to reduce his hostility, but his handsome and cold side profile still revealed the fact that he was not human. Wake him up, and I will pay you the money. Bailey Shangxia's voice was very low, and he looked like a little adult. Bing heard this, raised his eyebrows, and subconsciously tried to feel Helion Qingchen's ears. Those little ears were still drooping, but there was no silver earring on them, and they looked empty. Bing's thick eyebrows frowned. No. Chapter 1003. Hey, what's wrong with this kid? The other boss, Casso, bent his slender fingers and was about to poke the soft little face when Bailey Shangxia turned around and avoided the action. Casso curled his lips and muttered, "I can't even touch him." Bailey Shangxia looked at him expressionlessly and said in a lukewarm voice, "You are the Grim Reaper, and your aura has a bad influence on him. Is that so?" Casso frowned. How come he didn't know there was such a saying? Bing was obviously more reliable. He closed the notebook in his hand and said in a lukewarm voice, "He is not yet enlightened, and his physique is different from yours. However, your father's magic is too strong, and it has affected him. Put him in the coffin first. If your father can come back, everything will be easy." Bailey Shangxia did not speak, and did not refuse to deal with the Grim Reaper as before. For him now, nothing was more important than his younger brother. Bailey Shangxia bent down and put Hellion Qingqian, who was smaller than him, into the softest coffin. He did not leave, but looked at the little person beside him. When Hellion Qingqian felt uncomfortable, he fed her with the prepared water, and touched the little person's head with his fingers, as if he was comforting her. Casso shook his head in disbelief. "I didn't expect this vicious kid to have a brother complex. He used to only know how to eat people. All demons are like this." Bing's voice was very deep. Especially demons who are demonized often do a lot of things that they regret. What's more, he is a purebred demon. Killing people is just a means of survival for him. Demons are naturally cunning and selfish. You don't like them, do you? Casso smiled. I don't like them. But compared to humans, demons are not the dirtiest. So if this matter can be solved perfectly, we probably don't need to do anything, right? I don't want to fight with that man. In the end, I will only lose miserably. Even the King of Hell did not win, right? But if it's ice, it might last for a long time. Don't talk to me with your cowherd. Bing pushed the glasses on the bridge of his nose. We won't fight. Everything is unpredictable. Was there a variable? Casso looked out of the window. That's right, that person should appear. The death gods were right. At the bottom of the Hades, at the end of the red spider lily, a man indeed walked over. He was no longer dressed like he did in ancient times. He wore a white shirt and coffee-colored trousers. His entire person was clean like the moon hanging high in the sky, gentle and jade-like. Behind him was a little person with a gloomy face. The little person was holding a small gourd and had dark circles under his eyes. He looked like a ghost, but because he was tugging on the man's sleeve, he looked especially cute. Bailey Jiaju's silver-white long hair was dyed with pitch-black ink, dripping in front of his body. He allowed the river water to permeate his long robe and mix with the blood on his chest, motionless. The man walked to Beligaju's side and then paused. His eyes slid across Hellion Vivian's face like water. She is still the same as when she was in Mountain Tenya. As long as you are in trouble, her first reaction is to protect you. Beligaju slowly raised his head and said in a deep voice, Jing Wushuang, it's rare to see you in such a mess. Jing Wushuang's words were directed at Beligaju, but her eyes never moved away from Hellion Vivian. That was the tenderness that she had indulged for thousands of years. In this case, her sacrifice is not in vain. Do you know why she wanted to extract the Buddha bone? Because she didn't want to obey the order of Buddhism to hunt you down. Beligaju suddenly trembled. His fingers clenched tighter as if he had lost all senses. Since I met her, she could only live in Mountain Tenya. Unlike other people, she didn't have her own palace. The vast land of Prajna was her place of cultivation. When she was very young, she liked to eat steamed buns. Every time, she would sit under me and eat the steamed buns quietly. Those people of Buddhism never played with her. Jing Wushuang retracted her gaze and looked at Beligaju's face. But she always went to that place, as if she was looking for someone. In the past, I always thought that I met her earlier. Later, I realized that the person she was looking for was you. Jing Wushuang squatted down and looked at Hellion Vivian. She was always different from others. So many people entered Buddhism on Mountain Tenya who didn't want the protection of the Golden Lotus. But she poured the fairy water that she worked so hard to obtain on me. If only I could have met her earlier. then the person she likes now would be me. In Mountain Tenya, I always thought so, desperately trying to transform into a human. But I forgot that this kind of thing had nothing to do with who met her earlier, because the person who made her not feel lonely and full of different expressions was you. Baligaju paused with his wet body. His chest seemed to be torn apart by something. Large amounts of blood flowed out silently from inside. He originally thought that when she asked him to leave, it would be the most painful. However, when he saw her blocking in front of him without moving, he really felt the pain that humans talked about. It was like lines after lines were densely crawling all over his chest. With hatred, with unwillingness, and with an unprecedented heartache. Jing Wushuang's eyes were deep. He loosened his slender and white fingers, which were the feathers of the phoenix. Just fishing up the soul can't guarantee that she will wake up. She needs the Buddhist voice to gather the soul. I'm here to repay the fate that she planted in me. In the future, I will treat her well. After saying that, Jing Wushuang stood up. He didn't look at the scene behind. The little one followed behind him in confusion. He looked at him with his big eyes. Master, why don't you see her? You obviously want to see that lord for a long time. She doesn't need it. Jing Wushuang reached out his hand and rubbed the little one's head. There was desolation in his eyes. That's good. I don't want her to feel that she owes me. The little one didn't understand why the feelings were so complicated. However, the little one knew very well that if it weren't for the blood of Hellion Vivian, his master would never have come back. Now that his master had returned everything to that lord, everything should be over. How could it be over? The 10,000 steps of the path of Buddha worship were sincere kowtowing. It wasn't something that anyone could do. As a resentful baby, the little one didn't understand what kind of existence Hellion Vivian was to Jing Wushuang. Sometimes it was because she was too important. That was why he chose to withdraw silently and retreated to the position of a good friend, so that she would no longer feel that she owed her. Chapter 1004. The night was very dark, and there was fog everywhere. Hellion Vivian felt like she was soaked in water, and there was gentle water flowing in all directions. Apart from that touch, she could not feel anything else. Her body felt like it was sinking, and even she did not know where she was going. Her mind was empty, and she did not have any consciousness. Until she felt a chill on her neck, as if something had seeped into her body. It was much colder than the river, but she could not ignore it. Who was it? Who was it that was whispering into her ear? Hellion Vivian wanted to open her eyes, but her body did not listen to her command. Vaguely, her soul seemed to have gone to the place that everyone wanted to reach. On the top of Tenya Mountain, golden lotuses were everywhere. The Venerable sat on the golden lotuses as usual, and his eyes were full of disdain and pity for her. Phoenix, how many times have I told you that you were destined to be alone from the moment you were born? This is your destiny, but you refused to listen, and insisted on pursuing something that did not belong to you. You were arrogant and rebellious, and I tolerated you because you were brought here by the true Buddha. But what about you? Do you really think that you can be with the Emperor? Phoenix, some people are born lowly, and they are suitable to be dogs. Since you have sharp claws, you should cleanse the sins of the world for Buddhism. Don't think that you can be with anyone forever, because no matter who it is, they will abandon you in the end. Baligaju is the same. Since he has fallen from heaven and become a demon, when you two meet again, you will only be a beautiful soul to him at most. Hellion Vivian smiled. Even though she was covered in wounds, she still held the phoenix scimitar in her hand, and said arrogantly, "What does my life have to do with you?" The Venerable's eyes were full of darkness. "You will definitely regret your decision today." "I won't." Hellion Vivian curved her thin lips, which were stained with blood. "Even if I die, I will drag you down with me." Pong! The phoenix blade was raised. That kind of aura that could overwhelm everyone, or it could be said that it was extremely cold and luxurious, made the Buddhist aura suddenly disappear. At the same time, it was filled with a kind of flame that could annihilate 1,000 soldiers. Hellion Vivian was a ruthless person. If she wasn't happy, she wouldn't let the other party be happy either. When she opened her eyes, there was still a thick murderous aura in them. What entered his eyes was a completely classical European architectural style. Layers of black purplish gold curtains, a large curved-back velvet sofa, a long bench with silver-painted armrests, and a blazing fire in the fireplace. It appeared old-fashioned and tranquil. The silver moonlight poured down like water, enveloping the roses in front of the window, giving people a kind of dark beauty. It was enough to show that the owner of this house had good taste. Hellion Vivian wanted to get up, but before she could move, she felt the bed shake, and she was embraced by an ice-cold embrace. He hugged her very tightly, as if he wanted to crush her. His silver-white hair cascaded down the side of his face, falling straight into her neck. There was even a heart-wrenching dampness on his hair. Hellion Vivian finally reacted and reached out to grab him. "You? Shut up!" The man was very close to her, and the cold breath he exhaled hit her skin little by little, which didn't match his hoarse voice at all. Hellion Vivian was obedient at this time. Although she didn't know why a certain highness was angry, she still had to be obedient at this time. After a while, she spoke. Only then did she open her mouth and say, "Is your demonic nature gone?" "It seems to be gone." Beligaju didn't answer her. Something seemed to be ignited in those long and narrow eyes of his. Under the straight bridge of his nose, his thin lips opened slightly. "Idiot! I'm not an idiot." Hellion Vivian felt that she had to prove herself. "You don't know, when my soul was pulled out just now, I saw that old man, the Venerable One. He actually dared to laugh at me, and I killed him with a single slash. In fact, the Venerable One had died long ago. When one's soul was pulled out, they would remember things that happened a long time ago." Hellion Vivian had experienced the scene that she saw long ago, but her consciousness was a bit hazy, and she mistakenly thought that it was real. But Beligaju didn't know about this matter. Now that he heard it, he understood what Jing Wushuang said. He wondered if at that time, everyone was forcing her to go down the path of the devil to take him back. This idiot was injured in a place where he couldn't see. Beligaju tightened his fingers and pressed her back into his embrace. "This kind of thing won't happen again in the future." Huh? Hellion Vivian was a bit confused. Did he mean that he wouldn't use the devil transformation in the future? That's good. Hellion Vivian was very happy, and as soon as she was happy, her stomach began to growl. Her body was still a bit weak, but the weaker she was, the emptier her stomach felt. Beligaju naturally also felt the growl. He raised his head and looked at her, his handsome face looking good. Hellion Vivian seriously looked at Beligaju and defended herself. "Fighting is a very energy-consuming thing. It's normal to be hungry." Beligaju didn't care what excuse she found, and directly carried her in his arms, walking over to the long wooden table. The table was covered with a black tablecloth, and there were a few bouquets of red roses as decorations. Unlike humans, the demons did not have desserts on their tables. Instead, they had buckets of fresh blood and fine wine. He put her down, and his fingers picked up a bottle of wine. He casually opened it with his fangs, and leaned his enviable back against the wooden chair. He held her with one hand, and his thin lips slightly raised, adding a touch of gentleness to his doll-like face. "What do you want to eat?" "Not now, let's go back to the human world first." Hellion Vivian was worried about the two little ones. She wasn't sure if such a big demon would affect Shangxie and Qingqin. Even if she was hungry, it was difficult for her to eat in peace. She pulled Beligaju and was about to leave. However, just as she got up, Beligaju held her hand, and then carried her up. His side profile was unbelievably gentle. Hellion Vivian felt that this time when she woke up, His Highness seemed to be doting on her unbelievably. In the past, His Highness would walk in front, and she would follow behind, carrying a lot of things. Being carried like this didn't suit her image of an arms tycoon. But forget it, as long as he was happy. After all, as a domineering CEO, she had to know how to be considerate. This is really going to end soon, but I need to write something with love. Don't worry, I won't drag it out. I'll hug and nibble on all of you. Coming to the city of books. The happiest thing was to get to know all of you. I hope that it will end happily, and that we can still be together in the future if fate wills it. Chapter 1005. My lord, are we not going over? The judge, hiding in the dark alley, respectfully asked the person beside him. The king of hell leaned against the wall and crossed his arms in front of his chest. I'm not going there, he said with a wild aura. Then why are we standing here? The judge was very puzzled. With their status, it was really indecent for them to do such sneaky actions. Furthermore, they were from the Hades. If they were discovered peeping like this in the demon world, it would be very embarrassing. The king of hell stood in all directions and said with a domineering expression, "What do you know? This is called observing the enemy." The judge was speechless. My lord, wake up, please. That His Highness has never been your love rival. Can you change this idea of being a love rival all over the world? Also, if it wasn't for you not taking the madam seriously, how would you end up like this? Of course, the judge only thought about it and did not dare to say it out loud. The king of hell looked at Beligaju's back and narrowed his eyes. This guy can actually be a demon so calmly. To be honest, they came from the same place, the beginning of chaos. The reason why he could maintain his rationality was because he was in charge of the underworld from the very beginning. Unlike Beligaju, who insisted on being the emperor in the heavenly axiom, he had long suspected that that person had taken a liking to something in the upper realm when he was young. Otherwise, with that guy's original appearance, how could he have stayed in the heavenly axiom? After all, they were all the same, emitting viciousness from their bones. They were more selfish than anyone else. Apart from killing, there was nothing that they found interesting. The king of hell always wondered what would become of that person when he tore off that layer of noble holiness and was only left with his original demonic nature. He estimated that the other party would cause more damage than him. After all, he was from the wild faction and would do whatever he wanted. That person's heart was indeed black. But now, he was actually able to control his destructive nature very well. Was he afraid of hurting someone? Thinking of this, King of Hell suddenly smiled. Let's go. You're leaving just like that? Didn't you need to observe the enemy? The judge scratched his head. King of Hell's thin lips curved. A married old man is no longer competitive for me. The judge was speechless. A married old man? My lord, are you sure you're not jealous of Her Highness' beauty? Beligaju controlled his demonic nature, and the underworld was no longer in chaos. The undead who came and went finally rejoined the reincarnation queue. One by one, they stood there in a straight line, only wanting to be reincarnated into a good body. It had to be said that after Beligaju's torment, the order in Hades was much better than before. Previously, those undead were either making a fuss about not wanting to go to hell or not wanting to drink Granny Meng's soup. Eventually, a ghost messenger had to come out and suppress them. Now, they were extremely obedient because they found that even if they suffered the pain of being fried, it was still better than being annihilated by the devil chi that soared into the sky. The capital was also known as Sijo City. It described the layout of the city. There were many gates, such as Tiananmen, Dianmen, Donganmen, Xianmen, and countless others. It was not easy for ordinary people to find 2 children in this bustling city. The traffic in the capital was notoriously terrible in Huaxia. Everywhere one went, there would be traffic jams. Taking the subway was even more crowded, especially now that it was rush hour. Whether it was line 10 or line 4, they were full of cars. No one would know that above their heads, in the dark sky, there was a man wearing a black t-shirt with huge black wings behind him. He wore a pair of gloves that clung tightly to his skin, like a demon described in comics, and landed in a dilapidated alley. This alley was located in the old city of the capital, next to Shikahai, and further ahead was the built inclined Tobacco Pouch Street. At this time, the inclined Tobacco Pouch Street was always full of dazzling lineups. One could see clear bars everywhere, red lights and green willows. Most of the people who came here were tourists. Everyone was holding their phones to take pictures, and happy faces could be seen everywhere. In fact, the real alley in old Beijing was not here, but turned right and kept going inside. If someone came here at this time, they would definitely see the demon coming out of the night and the Grim Reaper welcoming him. Hey, you finally found me. Casso was no longer wearing human clothes, but a cloak like a cloak. He looked at Beligaju lazily. They are all in the house, but Bing has always disliked the existence of demon feathers in our place. So your highness, please put away your wings. How about it? Beligaju looked at him indifferently. Casso did not understand what the other party meant. Hellion Vivian came over and happily explained for him. He wants to say whether you are stupid or not. If you want to enter the door, of course you have to put away your wings, otherwise you will definitely be met. In that case, you don't need to remind him. Casso, thank you for explaining it to me. He gritted his teeth as he said this. Unlike Bing, who was still flipping through the black notebook, when he saw Bailey Jiaju and Hellion Wei Wei in front of him, he just raised his eyebrows. Then, he lowered his head and calculated on the abacus. His voice was calm as he said, the cost of accommodation, food, and coffin is 300 billion in total. 300 billion? Hellion Vivian was stunned. Do coffins make so much money now? Casso snorted and was very proud. We accept hell money. 1 yuan could buy millions of hell money. What was there to be proud of? Hellion Vivian felt better. Besides, looking at the two people, her son should be fine. Bailey Shangxie was indeed fine, but Hellion Qingchen was a little tired. But he was much better than when he came. When Hellion Vivian and the others came in, he was sitting in the coffin like a kitten with his ears down, holding the milk that Bailey Shangxie had just poured for him. When he saw Hellion Vivian, his eyes immediately lit up, and he wanted to pounce on Hellion Vivian. Beligaju blocked him, put one hand in his pocket, and picked up the little girl with the other. His elegant and domineering look was mixed with his appearance, like a big boss fighting for territory. He raised Qingchen high and looked at her in the eye. His thick eyebrows frowned. Is the devil's aura stronger than the Reiki? Qingchen's blood was 90% Reiki, and the remaining 10% was devil's aura. But now, the devil's aura was stronger than the Reiki. In addition to the increase of the devil's aura, the most important reason was that the Reiki in his body had decreased. Generally speaking, no one could affect the Reiki in his body because he was the descendant of the Phoenix unless... Chapter 1006. The Phoenix's spiritual energy was also weakened to the extreme. Beligaju's deep eyes suddenly narrowed. He turned his head and looked in the direction of Hellion Vivian. Hellion Vivian was a little confused by his gaze. She blinked her eyes and asked, "What's wrong?" "Nothing." Beligaju thought for a moment. He picked up the little one and placed him on top of his head. He felt the power in his body again. Hellion Qingchen grabbed the hair under his palms with 2 little claws. He looked at Bailey Shangxie with his big round eyes, as if he was asking his father what was wrong with him. Bailey Shangxie was worried that his little brother would be thrown by his father, so he reached out to catch him. He was not tall, so his noble and serious little face coupled with his action looked a little funny. After Beligaju felt the power, he threw Qingchen to his eldest son. Then he pulled Hellion Vivian over. He looked around and asked in a deep voice, "Do you feel uncomfortable anywhere? Does being hungry count?" Hellion Vivian asked seriously. Beligaju was stunned. He reached out his finger and knocked on her head. "What do you want to eat?" "Too many things. Crabs, lobsters, steaks, and so on." Hellion Vivian saw that her 2 sons were fine. She instantly regained her fighting spirit. Basically, they were talking about meat. Beligaju pulled them over and said to the 2 little ones without looking back, "Follow me." Then he walked out of the coffin shop. The Grim Reapers would not stop him, especially Bing, who did not want him to stay here. He had never liked demons, but this did not stop them from earning money from demons. Moreover, the devil's aura overpowered the spiritual energy in the little one's body. This was not normal. Leaving an abnormal factor in the coffin shop would only attract the attention of the patrollers in the human world. Unlike Casso, Bing's thinking had reached a certain level of precision. On the other hand, Casso was a little reluctant to leave. He looked at Qingchen and said, "Little brat, When are you coming back? I can introduce you to other children. Have you seen our little king of hell? He is now wandering around the human world all day, and his goal is to woo Little Hook every day. You will definitely like these two little brothers when you see them. Listen to your brother and come here often. Okay? Most importantly, remember to bring an apple the next time you come. The redder the color, the better. The Grim Reaper liked to eat apples. Qingqin knew this from reading manga. She didn't expect the Grim Reaper to be like this in real life. If I bring apple, will you bring me to the underworld to play? Qingqin had always been smart, and she quickly began to negotiate with Casso. Casso didn't refuse, but he found it strange. Why do you want to go to the underworld? The underworld is not fun at all. There is no cotton candy or ice cream. Even His Highness Little King of Hell goes to the human world every day. Why do you want to go to the underworld? Because the underworld is a little further away from the demon world. It is too hard for my brother to go to the demon world by himself. I can go with him, carry his small school bag, and bring him chocolate cake. Qingqin said seriously. Bailey Shangxia, who was standing at the side, was warmed by his younger brother's cuteness. He conveniently picked up the little one who was a head shorter than him. There is no need to negotiate with him. Next time I go to the demon world, I will bring you with me. In this way, he would not always be in danger from his father. He could also protect his little brother at all times. The last time he went to the demon world to cultivate, his little brother was bullied in the human world. This bullied referred to the incident with little Fatty Chung. It was enough to prove how serious Bailey Shangxia's brother was. Baligaju wasn't worried that the two little ones couldn't keep up with his pace. After walking out of the alley, they arrived at the bustling street of Ho-Hai. The street was filled with the atmosphere of the human world. Everyone was very happy. The resident singers in the bar were handsome and beautiful. They were very pleasing to the eye. However, even in such a crowded street, Helian Wei Wei's family of 4 still received a high number of heads turning, especially a man like Baligaju. It seemed that no matter where you threw him, he would be the first to be noticed. Bailey Shangxia was evaluating which human soul was more delicious. His father glanced at him, indicating that he should find a place to eat. Shouldn't this kind of thing be done by the adults? Bailey Shangxia complained in his heart while his eyes fell on a shabu-shabu shop. There were a lot of people in line. The business should be good. Mom and little brother both liked to eat hot pot. Although Bailey Shangxia was a demon and very sinister and cunning, he still abided by some cultured rules, such as waiting in line for a seat. This shabu-shabu-shabu-shabu-shabu shop was indeed very popular. There were more than a dozen tables in front of Helian Vivian and her family. Helian Vivian wasn't in a hurry. In order to eat the delicious shabu-shabu, she first bought a fried chicken chop to fill her stomach. First, she bent down and fed the two little ones. Then she fed Baligaju a bite. Finally, she ate it herself. It felt very comfortable to walk on the street. Every shop had its own specialties. Eating fried chicken and drinking iced tea like this, even His Highness seemed to be gentler. It wasn't Helian Vivian's illusion. Since she woke up, His Highness had been very gentle. If there was such a man who deliberately put his arms around you to prevent others from touching you when walking in a crowd, then he would be like this. When he lowered his head, he would smell the sandalwood fragrance of the other party, which proved that he really liked you. Bailey Jiaju was obviously a person who loved cleanliness and would never allow anyone to touch him. But now, he would rather be stained by himself so that he could turn sideways to protect himself. Helian Vivian was slow, but she wasn't a blockhead. Looking at the side of his face covered by silver hair, she kissed him without thinking. Baligaju suddenly froze. He looked back at her, his eyes deep and dark. Helian Vivian suddenly felt that His Highness must be touched. The novel was right. As a military tycoon, as long as he could give his other half a hot kiss at a critical moment, he could conquer the other half from body to heart. This was the activity that Helian Vivian was most satisfied with deep down in her heart. But the reality was, "Give me a tissue." Helian Vivian. "What for?" "Wipe your face. There's oil on your mouth." Baligaju's voice was very light. When it was light to a certain extent, it was extremely lethal. Hellion Vivian was immediately petrified. She didn't understand why His Highness always liked to ruin the atmosphere. It was fine if he didn't open his mouth, but once he did, it would ruin his drool-inducing face. Well, sons are still the most likable. Chapter 1007. As Hellion Vivian thought about it, she lowered her head and fed the two little ones another mouthful of chicken steak. The family of 4 walked around for about an hour and a half before it was their turn to eat. The important task of ordering was handed over to Bailey Shangxia. In Beligaju's words, he was already so old that he should learn to do it himself. Hellion Vivian was speechless. She once again felt that there was a problem with her family's education method. Bailey Shangxia didn't have any objections. He liked to spend money for his younger brother and mother, not to mention that he now had an income. His red eyes scanned the menu and finally landed on the staple food page. Handmade noodles. The waiter lowered his head and noted it down. Bailey Shangxia thought about it carefully for a while and said in a faint voice, "I want everything except this. Give me 2 bottles of wine." Hearing this, the waiter was stunned. He wanted everything except handmade noodles? The waiter decisively turned his head away, thinking that he really couldn't listen to the child's random order. He had to wait for the adults to make the decision. Just do as he says. Thank you. Hellion Vivian was very polite when she smiled. The waiter was completely dumbfounded. Why was even the adults like this? Customer, perhaps you don't know, but our beef and mutton are all real ingredients. It's not the same as the ones sold outside. Don't mention how full it is. 2 adults and 2 children really can't eat so much. Why don't you choose more carefully? The waiter spoke with a Beijing accent and was very good at service. Hellion Vivian liked this kind of authentic old Beijing people the most. She thanked him again and said, "Master, I know you have a good heart, but don't worry, we have a big appetite." Hearing that there were so many customers, the waiter didn't say anything more. He just muttered in his heart that how could they possibly finish all the food. They ordered everything. There were 28 plates of meat alone, not to mention all kinds of meatballs, tofu, vegetables, and noodles. Hellion Vivian and the others were sitting at a table that couldn't fit all the food, so they used 3 carts to put the ingredients. All the waiters didn't think that they could finish all the food. However, what they didn't expect was that, in just an hour, the 2 carts were empty. When the waiter went in to add soup to the copper pot, Hellion Vivian and the others were eating from the 3rd cart. They ate in a rather refined manner. But the ingredients could go down in the blink of an eye. What kind of people were they? Could it be that he had not eaten for a long time after robbing a tomb in the mountains? But even so, it was still too cruel. A total of 28 plates of meat, gone just like that, gone. What was even worse was that one of the beautiful women actually rubbed her stomach and said, "I don't think I'm full. Forget it, let's have supper when we get home." The waiter was speechless. Where did this person come from? When paying the bill, the cashier's hand trembled. The list was too long. When she looked up at the family of 4 in front of her, she thought that she had made a mistake. But it wasn't. It was them. The cashier was a little dizzy as she paid the bill for the other party. She felt like the whole world was a fantasy. Were all children nowadays so good at eating? In fact, it was fortunate that Hellion Vivian and the others were sitting in a private room. Otherwise, with so many plates of meat being served and empty plates being taken down, it would definitely attract a lot of people to watch. However, Hellion Vivian really felt that she was not full. After returning to the villa, she felt that her stomach was empty. This time, she didn't cook at home, because just as she was about to go to the kitchen, Beligaju grabbed her hand. "What do you want to eat? I'll make it. Steak." Hellion Vivian knew that the only dish that a certain highness knew how to cook now was steak. When they were in Kikishili, he had made it for her once. Unfortunately, she was weak at that time and couldn't eat it at all, so it was wasted. If she could eat it this time, it would be a happy occasion. Beligaju replied indifferently, "Okay." Wearing a black set of home clothes, he stood tall in the kitchen. His slender fingers took out olive oil and red wine. When he put the steak into the oil pot, There was an enticing sizzling sound, and the whole room was filled with the fragrance of meat. The kitchen was open, and Hellion Vivian could see such a beautiful scene from the high chair. Some men were really good to marry, such as a certain highness. Even frying steak looked like he was on the cover of a magazine. As if noticing Hellion Vivian's gaze, Beligaju casually put one hand in his trouser pocket while waiting for the steak, and hooked his other hand at her. Hellion Vivian leaned over and was kissed. As expected, his breath was different from hers. The man's lips were always soft and cold, and they were filled with the intoxicating scent of mint and sandalwood. Hellion Vivian always wanted to take the initiative most of the time, but she was always suppressed by the man domineeringly. "Kiss me later. I'm still frying the steak." She made it sound as if she was very introverted. He was the one who kissed her first. Hellion Vivian knew that she was not as good as the man, so she didn't dwell on this issue. Seeing a small piece of steak being served, she opened her mouth and took a bite. Beligaju always had unprecedented patience when feeding Hellion Vivian. The two of them held a plate of steak and nestled on the sofa. They ate one bite after another, and the red wine beside them was full. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows was the night view of the entire capital. It was bustling like countless stars. In the past, when Hellion Vivian took back her mother's business, she had seen such a night scene. But at that time she only felt desolate. But now it was different. Turned out that the saying was right. The scenery wasn't important. What was important was who was by your side to appreciate it. "We're done eating again." Beligaju hugged Hellion Vivian. His handsome face turned a little, and his eyes were looking at something else. "Are you still hungry?" Hellion Vivian felt for a moment, and then yawned. "I'm not hungry, but I want to sleep." "Sleep after eating." Bailey Jiaju looked at the person on the bed. She was always particularly quiet when she was sleeping. Her slender and fair wrist would always be resting on one side, and her long chestnut curly hair would fall to the side, giving people a kind of lingering beauty. It was not unreasonable that the Phoenix Dharma idol was the most beautiful Dharma idol in the Buddhist world. If her soul hadn't been taken away, Beligaju would think that she was pregnant again. But now, Beligaju intuitively felt that Hellion Vivian's reaction was related to her soul being taken away. Chapter 1008. What was strange was that nothing had changed about Hellion Vivian. Apart from being able to eat a little more, everything else was normal. Was he thinking too much? Bailey Jiaju caressed Hellion Wei Wei's cheeks with his fingers and reached out to pull her into his embrace. Hellion Vivian seemed to have sensed his breath, so she tilted her head and buried her face in his chest. Bailey Jiaju's gentleness was always hidden inadvertently. For example, right now, when Hellion Wei Wei moved, he seemed to be able to comfort her. He tilted his head and naturally kissed her black hair. Hellion Vivian moved again and hugged Beligaju's waist tightly. She was indeed very domineering in this aspect. She had to hold on tightly to what was hers. Beligaju chuckled softly. He always misunderstood a certain someone. Other than helplessness, he also doted on her. The two of them hugged each other, and their shadows were reflected on the floor-to-ceiling windows. The room was filled with stars, and it was beautiful and romantic. The fireworks in the sky reflected Beligaju's watery gaze, as if that moment was eternal. The next day, the gentle morning light shone through the curtains. There were white roses planted outside the villa, and the room was filled with a faint fragrance. As soon as Hellion Wei Wei opened her eyes, she habitually wanted to find water to drink. Her bare feet casually stepped on the wooden floor, reached for a bottle of cold water, and raised her head to drink. She wanted to go back to bed and continue sleeping. However, she didn't know if it was her imagination, but she felt that her hair was especially long today. Also, the bed seemed to have become bigger. When Hellion Vivian lay back down, she lowered her eyes and looked at her ankle-length hair. She tilted her head and thought for a moment. In the end, she felt that it wasn't a big deal, so she tilted her head and planned to continue sleeping with His Highness. After all, with His Highness's figure, it was very comfortable to sleep with him in her arms. However, Her hand had just wrapped around him when Bailey Jiaju woke up. After his deep eyes saw her, he was stunned for a moment. Then he pressed down on her hand. Because he had just woken up. His voice still carried a trace of hoarseness and gloominess. "Do you feel uncomfortable anywhere?" "No." Hellion Vivian didn't understand why His Highness kept asking her this question yesterday. She raised her eyebrows. "What's wrong?" Beligaju looked at the figure in front of him and said in a faint voice, "Nothing. It's good that you're not feeling uncomfortable. Then let's continue to sleep." Hellion Vivian hugged him and was in a good mood. "Let's stay in bed." With her eyes closed, Hellion Vivian's skin was milky white and her facial features were more tender. Her arms and legs were much smaller than before. Her face was also small with a unique stubbornness. Her snow-white kasaya dragged on the ground like flowing water. Her soft black hair hung down beside her body, like a lotus flower blooming silently on the surface of the water at night. Beligaju remembered the first time he saw Phoenix on Mountain Tenya. At that time, she was also very quiet. She didn't speak or smile like a little jade sculpture. That's right. The person in his arms had returned to her childhood appearance. Obviously, this was the result of her soul being taken away. Phoenix had returned to her embryonic form when she transformed into a human on Mountain Tenya. As long as she was given some time to read more Buddhist scriptures and drink a few bottles of divine water, it would be helpful for her growth. Beligaju had studied the matter of raising little Phoenix when he was in Tiandao. At that time, he wanted to snatch Hellion Vivian from Buddhism and raise her himself, not to mention now. After knowing these reasons, His Highness was much calmer. When he took a second look at Hellion Vivian, the corners of his mouth lifted into a sinister smile. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Hellion Vivian lay in his arms, quietly opened her big eyes that were as clear as mercury. With her fluffy hair hanging down, she looked very dazed. Beligaju buried his face in her long hair and chuckled. "Nothing. I feel like something is wrong," Hellion Vivian said very seriously. Beligaju raised his eyebrows and asked casually, "Then what do you think is wrong?" "How would I know what you're laughing at?" Hellion Vivian felt that something was wrong the moment he opened his eyes. "Is there something on my face?" Beligaju held the person in his arms, and the corners of his mouth were still curled up, full of evil. "No, do you still want to sleep? Or get up and eat something?" "Let's eat." Hellion Vivian sighed helplessly. "I can't sleep because of your laughter." Beligaju hummed in agreement and held Hellion Vivian up with a faint smile. He seemed to be unbelievably gentle. "What do you want to eat?" "Meat is not good. You can't digest it." Hellion Vivian was obviously confused by this arrangement. "I've always digested it well." That was before. After Beligaju put her on the chair, he bent down and kissed her forehead. He smiled. "Now you have to be more careful. Drink a cup of milk first." Hellion Wei Wei never refused food. When she saw Bailey Jiaju put the milk on the wooden table, she didn't even think about it before she picked it up and took a sip. Halfway through the drink, she suddenly paused and looked at her hand. It wasn't an illusion. Her hands had become smaller. Hellion Vivian stood up immediately and turned her head to look at the half-open dressing mirror. There was only one thought left in her mind. "Damn, Sakya is definitely playing with me." As Hellion Vivian herself, she hadn't seen herself as a child for a long time. After all, she was a person who didn't like to take photos. Now that she saw it, she just wanted to run a few laps downstairs and have some peace and quiet. What's going on? No wonder His Highness suddenly asked her to drink milk. Hellion Vivian turned around and looked at Beligaju. That person didn't seem to care, nor did he mind that little Phoenix was looking at him with hidden bitterness. He poured a cup of milk for Hellion Vivian. "Drink more milk and you'll grow faster." So this was what he was smiling at from the beginning. Hellion Vivian was depressed. She sat on the wooden chair and didn't say anything. She just held the milk and drank it. Beligaju found it very interesting. He couldn't help but hug her and raise her above his head. The smile on his face was unprecedentedly bright. "You're so cute." Hellion Vivian. She had never seen Beligaju like this before. Did he like her that much when she was small? Beligaju loved her so much that he couldn't put her down. Why? Hellion Vivian was right. Beligaju really liked her this way. After all, His Highness was very obsessed with Phoenix when she was young. He didn't have the chance to raise her in the past. Now that he finally had the chance, of course he would have this kind of reaction. But you don't have to carry her everywhere you go. Hellion Wei Wei helplessly supported her forehead, just like a little Buddhist monk. Chapter 1009. Beligaju let her sit on his lap while he opened a business magazine to read. He looked very handsome, but he had to kiss her hair from time to time. She was really not used to it. Moreover, if others saw her like this, they would laugh to death. She definitely couldn't let her son and that group of rough men know about this. That was the only thought left in the miserable Hellion Vivian. She couldn't go to the car dealership during the day, nor could she stay in the villa for long. There were no classes at the kindergarten today, so the two little ones would definitely sleep in at home. She had to escape now. The only good place Hellion Vivian could think of was the headquarters of the Ju Wei group. There was a place to rest and a computer to play online games. As long as she was given a book or a movie, she could stay there for the whole morning without affecting Beligaju's work. Most importantly, no one would guess who she was there. You want to go to my office so much? Do you want to check on me? Beligaju glanced at Hellion Vivian and asked calmly, how do you want to introduce yourself? In fact, the 11-year-old Hellion Vivian was not really a child. However, because the embryonic form of Phoenix made people look 3 years younger than their actual age, and because Beligaju was too tall, Hellion Vivian had to look up at him every time she spoke. Just say that I'm your sister. Oh? Beligaju smiled slowly. Okay. Hellion Vivian grabbed him. Her hand was still small. Then let's go now. I'll get someone to prepare the car. Beligaju's voice was very casual, but the smile on his face did not match it. The villa area was not far from the headquarters. However, when the staff on the first floor saw their CEO Ju appear in the building at this time, all of them tensed up. Fortunately, the company had a dedicated elevator for the CEO. Otherwise, they would definitely go crazy if they stayed in the same elevator as CEO Ju. However, who was the girl besides CEO Ju? She was so pretty, especially that pair of eyes that were as clear and pure as a transparent spring. It was as if as long as one was looked at by that pair of eyes, even if she said that the sky was round and the earth was square, one would believe her. Moreover, the clothes she was wearing were also different from the rest. It was a bit like the kasaya that was specially made for the novice monks in ancient times. It was extremely white and clean. Did you see that? The person that CEO Ju brought along. Of course I saw it. I took a closer look just now. That child is so beautiful. Why is her hair so long and beautiful? It almost reaches her ankles, right? That's not the point. The most important thing is the other party's identity. It's my younger sister. How do you know? Because, when I entered the office with the excuse of delivering some documents, I happened to hear CEO Ju asking the child to call him Big Brother. Beligaju was indeed thinking of a way to make Hellion Vivian call him brother, and in a very shameless way. If you want to play computer games, say those 2 words. Hellion Vivian. I'm not playing computer games anymore. I'm going to lie on the sofa and rest with my eyes closed. However, Beligaju was not satisfied with this person leaving his sight. He grabbed her back and pressed her on his lap. His smile was very beautiful, with a unique demonic charm, and his voice was very low. Vivian, are you sure you want to persevere until noon? It's only 8:40 in the morning. There are still more than 3 hours until noon. Are you going to lie on the sofa in boredom for more than 3 hours? In order to prove her backbone, Hellion Vivian was determined not to speak. Beligaju reached out and rolled up the sleeves of her kasaya, which was too long, and then whispered in her ear, even if you really persevere until noon, I will use lunch to threaten you. Hellion Vivian. Isn't it just hunger? Haha. Did he really think that she would give up everything for food? How naive. So, food can't threaten you. Hellion Vivian snorted in her heart and said, of course. Then I can only take a picture of your current appearance and send it to my son and the others, Beligaju said slowly as he pretended to reach for his phone. When Hellion Vivian heard this, she turned around abruptly and reached out to grab his wrist. After hesitating for a long time, her little face flushed red. Beligaju wasn't in a hurry and just waited for her with a smile. Hellion Wei then clenched her teeth and called out the two words brother with a pause. The man, who had tasted what he wanted, chuckled softly as he held the phone. He kissed the top of Hellion Vivian's head and said, "Good girl." Hellion Vivian didn't care what book she was holding in her hand and bit it in annoyance. This person is so bad. Of course, Beligaju wouldn't let little Phoenix, whom he had carefully raised, feel awkward for too long. His Highness had always been good at tricking people and then giving them a sweet date. "Don't bite the book. You'll knock your teeth out." Beligaju reached out to block Hellion Vivian's little head and said, "I'll get someone to bring you the notebook?" Hellion Vivian nodded. She wanted to search for records about her in the Buddhist scriptures on the internet. She couldn't see Sakya right now, so she could only find out how to recover her strength through some written records. Although many of the records were fake and exaggerated, she could still extract some useful information by removing the branches and leaves. Beligaju looked sideways and pressed his fingertips on the phone on the desk, indifferently giving orders. When facing other people, he was far from being as approachable as when he was with Hellion Vivian. Even after being transmitted through the switchboard, his cold voice was even lower than a real person's. The secretary had been looking for a chance to listen in for a long time. Now that she received Beligaju's order, she took a MacBook Air and entered the CEO's office without hesitation. About 30 seconds later, she came out with a very serious expression. In the end, she couldn't help but scream in the group chat, "He's too gentle. You haven't seen how CEO Ju is like. He's so gentle that it breaks people's hearts. When I came in, he was holding a cup of water and feeding someone. He even told the girl to drink slowly, otherwise she would choke. Do you believe that CEO Ju would say something like that? I don't believe it. I don't believe it +1. I don't believe it plus 10,086. Who's that girl? Upstairs. Are you new? Why aren't you in formation? Didn't I just say that she's CEO Ju's sister? She's so cute. A little beauty in a kasaya with prayer beads in her hand. She's so cute. When did I have an aunt? Wait a minute. This reply doesn't seem right." Secretary Lu quickly clicked on one of the avatars in the WeChat group and was completely stunned when she saw it. Little CEO. When did he sneak into the group? Chapter 10:10. In the villa, Bailey Shangxie brought over a small stool for Qingchen to sit on. He was originally washing his little brother's hair seriously with the showerhead. However, when he saw the news in the group, Bailey Shangxie couldn't help but pause. The corners of his mouth curled up into a mischievous smile. Little Qingchen could only feel the water on his head rushing to his ears. He looked at Bailey Shangxie with his big bright eyes and asked, "Big brother?" The water rushed into my ears. Bailey Shangxie immediately came back to his senses. He directly pulled a towel over and nervously wiped his face. Qingchen giggled. Okay. Big brother, why were you in a daze just now?" "I was looking at the news in the group," Bailey Shangxie said as he glanced at his phone again. Qingchen clenched her little hands and looked over. "What group?" "The company's group. There's always a lot of gossip about Bad Dad in there." Bailey Shangxie leaned over to let her see clearly. Qingchen swiped her little finger on the screen. She raised her big eyes and asked, "You lurked in the group because of this?" "Of course, why else would I?" Bailey Shangxie said reasonably. "Dad, you have to be careful of him." Qingchen. "Big brother, can you not be so bad?" It was obvious that Bailey Shangxie's bad side had already formed. In order to slander a certain highness, he seriously pointed at the screen with his little finger and looked at Qingchen. "This aunt who suddenly appeared must be fake. I'll take you to the company later to expose her." "Okay." Qingchen had always followed her big brother wherever he went. Bailey Shangxie thought that this time he would definitely surprise his father. In fact, He didn't expect that Beligaju had installed a tracking device on his little phone a long time ago to prevent him from tricking his father again. Thus, as soon as the two little ones set off, their whereabouts were discovered. Beligaju looked at the little red that lit up on his phone and raised his eyebrows slightly. He then changed the position in which he hugged Hellion Vivian. He didn't seem to be in a hurry. Instead, the corners of his lips curled up into an evil smile. Beligaju was very comfortable, but Hellion Vivian was very helpless. Her original office scene was, she would lie on the sofa, eat potato chips, play games, and watch anime or movies. Then, a certain highness would sit at the desk and work seriously. She could even turn her head from time to time to admire his highness' handsomeness when he was working. There was food to eat, anime to watch, and handsome men. That was the best thing in life. However, Hellion Vivian would never have guessed that there was none of that, because his highness had calmly told her that if she moved around, it would affect his efficiency. If he didn't hold her, he wouldn't be in the mood to work. Thus, Hellion Vivian became his highness's personal pillow today. Beligaju had always let Hellion Vivian sit on his lap. Because she had become smaller, even if he hugged Hellion Vivian, she wouldn't hinder him from doing business. However, it was obvious that his highness wasn't very satisfied with this. Thus, he moved his thin lips and blew into Hellion Vivian's ear. Shang Xie and the others are here. I don't know why they aren't coming up. What Hellion Vivian was most afraid of now was of course being seen by her sons. Her entire body stiffened, and then she said very calmly, "Let's go. Let's go somewhere else." Of course, a certain someone wouldn't object. He even added, "If we go out now, it's very likely that we will meet them face to face in the hall. I tried just now, but Secretary Lu's phone couldn't be reached. That means Shang Xie and the others already know something and are waiting for us in the hall." Hellion Vivian also thought of this possibility and frowned. "So let's not go to the hall." Beligaju stood up from the office chair and tidied his sleeves. His suit looked good. "There's a tree outside the second floor. Let's go there." "Okay." Hellion Vivian moved as soon as she said so. This time, the two of them didn't take the CEO's special elevator. Instead, they took a normal elevator and stopped on the second floor. The second floor belonged to the planning department. When they saw Beligaju, everyone in the department was stunned. The planning manager thought something was wrong and stood up stutteringly. "Ju CEO Ju." Bailey Jia Ju only gave him a "you continue to work" gesture, and then strode to the front of the window. With a whoosh, he opened the window that had no protective net. His movement was not hindered at all, and was as handsome as moving clouds and flowing water. At first, the planning manager thought that CEO Ju was here to inspect their work. In the end, he felt that the air was not good, so he opened the window. After all, their CEO was very particular about cleanliness. Everything that could be seen must be white except for himself, which was black. Therefore, the planning manager deliberately moved his nose to sniff. After confirming that there was no strange smell, he wanted to ask something. Who knew that Beligaju's next move would be to use one of his long legs to step on the window in a very cool manner. Then, using this as a support, he jumped out of the window like he was in a movie. This time, it wasn't just the planning manager. Even the employees who were still obsessed with Beligaju turned pale with fright. What was wrong with CEO Ju? Why did he jump off the building? Although this was only the second floor, he would break his leg if he jumped off. But in the next second, they realized how stupid their thinking was. Because when they looked down, it was clear that it was a perfect landing. Even the curve of Beligaju's shirt was crisp and clear. There was not a single flaw, and it only made people feel that it was handsome. After Bailey Jiaju landed, he adjusted his collar and turned around. With a smile on his face, he looked at Hellion Wei Wei, who was standing in front of the glass window. Hellion Vivian did not hesitate. With one hand on the window, she immediately jumped in Beligaju's direction. Hellion Vivian would not know what Beligaju was thinking at that moment. In fact, a long time ago, when Beligaju returned to Mountain Tenya again after becoming a god, Hellion Vivian was also like this. She was standing on the roof of the Hall of Great Strength. At that time, she was only this small, wearing a pure white kasaya. She did not have such a stunning spiritual aura, and seemed to be hesitating whether to jump or not. Beligaju knew that day she was punished by the Venerable One to be confined to copy scriptures for some reason. However, Phoenix did not like to be confined since she was young, so she always thought of various ways to escape. At that time, Beligaju wanted to tell her to jump, and he would catch her from below. However, Hellion Vivian did not jump, because Sakya appeared. Chapter 10:11. At that time, the true Buddha had yet to face the tribulation. Buddhism was fair in its rewards and punishments. Sakyamuni smiled as he looked at the little phoenix who was sitting on the roof and didn't know what to do. He raised his finger and a golden lotus appeared to protect his body. Little Phoenix sat on the golden lotus and came down from the roof. She ran toward the true Buddha without thinking, as if she did not notice his existence at all. Everyone in the three realms knew. When Phoenix broke out of her shell in the fire of hell, it was Sakya who brought Phoenix to Buddhism by himself by shining the light of Buddha on Mount Bujo. In other words, the first person Phoenix saw was Sakya. Her feelings for Sakya were like a bird that just broke out of its shell. She would treat the first person she saw as her closest kin. Otherwise, Phoenix would not use the Phoenix scimitar to sweep away all obstacles for Buddhism in order to repay his kindness. As long as Sakya appeared, Phoenix's eyes would always fall on that person, even though Beligaju knew that this was not love. But at that time, he kept asking himself why those clear and bright eyes did not see him. Perhaps at that time his inner demon was planted. He wanted to get this person crazily. However, he was very clear about her identity. At that time, he might not be able to get it. Just like what the King of Hell said, Beligaju was very thoughtful. He had been like this since he was a child. His noble indifference was not a pretense. But the calculation in his heart was also real. That was why he stayed in the upper three realms to wait for an opportunity. An opportunity to make her belong to him, both physically and mentally. Now, Hellion Vivian had returned to her childhood appearance and was truly reborn from hell. Just like when she had just broken out of her shell. What was different was that this time, the first person she saw was himself. This was the fundamental reason why Beligaju liked to see Hellion Vivian become smaller. Now, this person fell from a high place and only had eyes for him. That feeling was indescribable. Beligaju just raised a bright smile that had never been seen before and reached out to catch her. Even his eyes had turned into a beautiful golden color. Hellion Vivian always felt that he was carrying her like he was carrying a pet. But because their time was limited, Hellion Vivian didn't struggle and let him carry her forward with large strides. Sure enough, Bailey Shangxia noticed something the moment there was movement. Originally, he thought that after dealing with Secretary Liu, he would wait for his father to come down. After all, he didn't believe that his father was a person who valued his work. This time, it was inconceivable that he would come to the company so early. It must be related to the legendary little monk. However, Bailey Shangxia did not expect that his father, who had always disdained climbing walls, would escape in such an undignified manner this time. Through the window, it did not match the aesthetics of demons at all. Therefore, when Bailey Shangxia walked out with his younger brother, he didn't have time to see anything. Hellion Vivian, who had avoided a disaster, finally breathed a sigh of relief. She lowered her head and looked up some information about herself. Then, she sat in the car and announced, "From today onwards, I will recite scriptures every day. I have to grow back quickly." The two-faced His Highness didn't tell her that she would recover faster with the holy water. His fingers stroked little Phoenix's ankle-length hair and said, "Then find a quieter place." Okay. Hellion Vivian thought for a moment and said, "I am different from other Buddhas. I can also increase my Buddhist fate by redeeming the dead and redeeming evil spirits. During the day, I will recite scriptures. At night, you will follow me to the car dealership. The business there has been empty for a long time. It's time to accept orders." Beligaju raised his eyebrows and said, "Accept orders? Yes, the car dealership will become an online convenience store at night." Hellion Wei Wei said as she logged into her Taobao account. She smiled and squinted her eyes. My shop is very popular. It was indeed so. However, the shop that Hellion Vivian mentioned was very well hidden. Only people who needed it would find it. Of course, there were also people who didn't know the reason. When they came to this shop, they would even laugh and say, "What the hell?" Because this Taobao shop was very strange. There were two sections on the website. One was called Day, and the other was Night. In the day, the things that were bought were very normal, such as car parts and so on. But when one clicked on the page at night, many unusual things would appear. It turned out that this Taobao shop was also doing another business besides car parts. This kind of business was a service industry, so it was a little special. I don't know if you have heard of a saying that ghosts actually exist in the world, but the six paths are different. You and I are mortals, so we can't see them. If you had just moved to a new house and found that the light bulb of the circuit security was always on and off, and that the TV would be turned on for no reason at night. If you often have nightmares and feel like there is a stone on your body when you sleep, you can't even move your fingers when you want to open your eyes. If your family or friends suddenly have a high fever and talk nonsense, eat with their hands, drink without order, and can't find the cause of the illness in the hospital, then you are welcome to come to our shop at any time. The shop will send the most professional people to completely solve the root problem. Most people who didn't know, even if they accidentally opened this Taobao shop, very few people would believe it. They would just think that this Taobao shop was using to attract customers. After all, there were so many people who opened shops online. Without some skills and special marketing, how could they keep customers? However, they didn't know that all of this was real. Hellion Vivian had also received many orders through the internet. At first, there were people who were too curious and wanted to play with Hellion Vivian first, but they were all stopped by Hellion Vivian with a sentence. Flirt with the shop owner at night. Will you see ghosts at night? Basically, this kind of setting was an automatic reply. If they really had something to ask Hellion Vivian for, they would directly explain the matter when replying. If there was nothing, most of them would retreat in fear when they saw this. Of course, Hellion Wei's charges were also different. She would judge how ferocious the ghost this time was based on the other party's description. She would charge more if the ghost was clingy, but if it was easy to deal with, she would charge less. Today, she needed to find a malicious ghost. It would be best if it was a malicious ghost that had killed many people and absorbed many evil ghosts. Even the ghost servants couldn't do anything to it. This was because the deeper the resentment, the more difficult it was to be taken in by the netherworld. If it didn't enter the netherworld, it wouldn't be able to reincarnate. If such a malicious ghost was expiated, it would be a great merit. Her fate with Buddha would also increase. Chapter 10:12. The car dealership was especially quiet at night because the rough men had all returned to their apartments. Hellion Wei didn't have to worry about being seen by anyone. She moved a soft cushion and sat next to Bailey Jiaju. Her hands and legs were crossed as if she was meditating, her mouth silently muttering Buddhist scriptures. Baligaju, who had attended countless Buddhist feasts in Buddhism, naturally knew what she was doing. However, it turned out that little Phoenix did not like chanting Buddhist scriptures. After chanting for a while, she opened her eyes. When she turned her head and saw that Baligaju seemed to be asleep, she ran back to the bedroom and ran over with a big blanket. She carefully covered Baligaju with it. She did not expect that the man was not asleep. He pressed her into his arms forcefully and ran his fingers through her hair. The corners of his mouth curled up slightly. Sneak up on me? Boss, I'm only 11 years old. How can I sneak up on you? Hellion Vivian used her head to hit Baligaju's chest. Baligaju chuckled and pressed down on the furry head. It's not a sneak attack? Then go to sleep. Leave those Buddhist scriptures for tomorrow. No, we have to do business today. Hellion Vivian supported Baligaju with her small hands. Her small face puffed up slightly as she muttered. I remember that when I was in Mountain Tenya, I could grow taller by chanting Buddhist scriptures for a period of time. Why is it useless in the human world? Baligaju listened to Little Phoenix's words and his smile deepened. You're just chanting Buddhist scriptures and not copying them. Of course, the effect is not as good as when you're in Buddhism. Is that the reason? Hellion Vivian was a little doubtful. Beligaju's expression did not change as he asked in return, "What else could it be?" "I don't know. I've forgotten how I grew up." Hellion Vivian was indeed a child at that time. She was considered well-behaved. Other than not liking to be locked up, she followed Buddhism's teachings. However, when she grew up, she would fight with others from time to time. She was not very clear about the process of her growth. In her impression, she was the same as other little acolytes. However, when she thought about it carefully, it was different. She did not need to shave her hair. In the beginning, Little Phoenix thought that she was too individual and wanted to cut her hair. However, Sakya said that she did not need to cut her hair because a phoenix could not be without feathers. Hellion Vivian was confused and tried to recall the past. "I can't remember." "Is that I've become stupid?" "To the present." "No." Beligaju gently rubbed her cheeks with his fingers. He seemed to like listening to her talk about how she had forgotten about her growth. He smiled beautifully with his extremely handsome face. "At that time, you had just broken out of your shell from hell. Of course, there are many things that you can't remember clearly." Hellion Vivian looked at him. She seemed to have more facial expressions after she became smaller. "But I clearly remember that you always ignored me when I threw buns at you. You even had a cold look on your face." "What else? What else do you remember about me?" Bailey Jiaju's deep voice was full of coaxing. Hellion Vivian was not fooled. She quickly realized that it was too intimate for her to sit on his body in such a position. Although her body had not fully developed, Beligaju was different. He was hot all over. "I don't remember. Where's the pen and paper that you gave me before? I want to copy the Buddhist scriptures." "Now?" Beligaju frowned. He didn't remember that she was so diligent. Hellion Vivian nodded. "Now it has to grow back quickly. Are you so afraid that others will see you?" Beligaju hugged her from behind and laughed in her long hair again. Hellion Vivian glanced back at him lightly. "That's just one of the reasons. The most important reason is that I can't sleep with you in my current state." Beligaju was stunned. Then, he couldn't stop the laughter from overflowing from his throat. Hellion Vivian was a little confused by his laughter. She said it very seriously. "You're right. You can't sleep with me in your current state." Beligaju put her down. He still liked the feeling of being completely dependent on her, so he didn't want to take care of her for a few more days. The hesitation was only for a moment. Soon, Beligaju held Hellion Vivian in his arms again and looked at the screen of the computer from behind her. "There's a business." Hellion Vivian saw that Taobao was flashing. She was in a good mood and clicked on the page. The person on the other end of the dialog box sent over a trembling message. "Can you really catch ghosts? She seems to be following me all the time and won't let me go at all. I'm really going crazy because this ghost is not like me anymore. You know, I was very obedient and never thought of developing a relationship with anyone. But one day when I woke up, I found myself lying next to a man. The man was very old. He hugged me and said a lot of things. He said something about how cute I was last night, but I remember that I fell asleep after entering the dormitory and didn't go anywhere. Why is it like this? Why did I become like this?" Hellion Vivian typed quickly and went straight to the point. "Where are you? Send me your address and contact information. I need to meet you. It's best to meet you at night." Soon, the other party sent an address. It was a restaurant near Wadayaku. This address was not out of Hellion Wei's expectations, as most of the universities in the capital were located here. After confirming the good news, Hellion Wei closed the notebook. She originally wanted to put on her own shoes, but she didn't expect Bailey Jiaju to put her down on the sofa. Then, he supported her body with one knee, tilted his handsome face, and lifted her white bare feet. His movements were very gentle. Not only that, after helping her put on her shoes, he even took her hand and kissed it. He said, "My beautiful master, are you satisfied with my service?" Hellion Vivian blushed and threw herself into the man's arms. She said in a muffled voice, "Let's go. Don't use the handsome man trick. We can't sleep." "Yes, master." Beligaju smiled wickedly and kissed her small ear. He looked at her trembling body with satisfaction and then carried her out of the door. It was already dark outside. Beligaju didn't need to hide anything. Black feathers fluttered down, and he flew over the roof with Hellion Vivian. The demon's figure was more perfect at night. Especially when they spread their black wings and landed under the moon, it was like a god had descended. Of course, this scene wouldn't be seen by anyone. The city was still bustling, especially at Wadayaku after night fell. There were many Koreans in this place. You could hear phrases like Aadaukai after taking 2 steps. Chapter 10:13. Even the girl who had approached Hellion Vivian had invited her to a Korean restaurant called Myeongdong. When she walked in, the lights were very dim. It was obviously a very popular place. Logically speaking, such a phenomenon shouldn't have happened. However, it was precisely because of this phenomenon that Hellion Wei smiled. She did not make the call. Her clear eyes swept across the dining hall and fixed her gaze on a girl with waist-length hair. Hellion Wei also didn't hesitate. Even if she became smaller, the innate queen's aura on her body didn't diminish in the slightest. Although she looked very cute now, this didn't hinder her sensitivity. Miss Towsey. Hellion Vivian sat directly opposite the girl. The girl seemed to be afraid of something. When she was suddenly called, she raised her head and looked at Beligaju, who was sitting beside Hellion Vivian. Hellion Vivian knew that it was difficult not to notice His Highness' face, so she casually made up an identity for him. This is my assistant. Now, Miss Towsey, please tell me more about you. Your assistant? Towsey looked at Hellion Vivian hesitantly. You're the owner? Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows and smiled. Miss Towsey, don't worry. Although I'm small, I'm not bad. Otherwise, I wouldn't have sat directly opposite you without even making a call. After Hellion Vivian's reminder, Towsey realized this key point. Her eyes widened. How did you know it was me? It's very simple. Hellion Vivian took a deep breath. You have the smell of a ghost on you. Towsey shuddered at Hellion Vivian's words. She's still here? Then can you send her away? I'm really too scared. Too scared. She's not here. Hellion Vivian glanced at her again. Which school are you from? I suspect she's in your school. Towsey's expression changed. School? That's right. Hellion Wei's eyes looked at her. Moreover, if we don't drive her away, you will completely lose your own consciousness in less than 3 days, and this body of yours will no longer belong to you. It's very simple. This is the legendary possession. Since you're a university student, you should be able to understand what I mean. Towsey's lips trembled. She wants to turn me into her? Something like that. Hellion Vivian knew that Miss Towsey was very against her going to her school. So Hellion Vivian didn't say anything to make her feel better like other people. Instead, she told her the truth. The person called Towsey seemed to have no other choice. She stood up with one hand on her forehead and said, Well, I'll take you to the school to have a look. It was said that the school was a magical place. During the day, it was bustling, and it seemed that no place could be as noisy as here. At night, it was very quiet, and even the sound of footsteps echoed behind. However, when Hellion Vivian and the others arrived at the school, it wasn't too late, so the lights were still on. Occasionally, 1 or 2 students would pass by on bicycles, and young couples would come out for a walk. Overall, this school didn't seem to have any problems. However, that vague resentment seemed to be lingering in every corner of the school. Hellion Vivian had just taken a few steps when Beligaju picked her up and placed her on his left shoulder. If it was someone else who did this, it would definitely look very strange. However, Beligaju's height was there, and he was very handsome. When he held Hellion Vivian with one hand, his windbreaker fluttered slightly, and he was extremely handsome. Hellion Vivian was surrounded again, but fortunately, she was used to it. She pressed her small hand on the man's shoulder and carefully observed the surrounding buildings. In fact, if it wasn't to make his little phoenix happy, Beligaju wouldn't have agreed to let her come here to catch ghosts. Those stupid and dirty things, how could they touch her scent? Hellion Vivian also noticed the way a certain someone raised her. It seemed to be summed up in one word, and that was a tyrant's pet. When she tilted her head, he would ask her if she was thirsty. If her shoelaces were untied, he would personally lower his head to help her tie them. Before coming, he even reminded her that it was okay to play, but she couldn't use her real strength. If he saw that she was too tired, he didn't mind taking care of this malicious spirit himself. If a certain highness personally took care of it, not to mention a malicious spirit, even a demon would be beaten to pieces by him. If that was the case, how could she complete her plan of growing up? Beligaju raised Hellion Vivian very carefully. He didn't even let her touch cold water. Today, a certain highness personally washed Hellion Vivian's hair for her, including putting on her shoes. Tauzi looked at the two of them from the side. After hesitating for a long time, she said to Beligaju, "The two of you seem to be very close." Beligaju didn't say anything. He only curled his lips, which was devilish and charming. Tauzi was stunned. Hellion Vivian turned her head and pointed at the teaching building not far away. Did someone die in that place? In an instant, Tauzi's expression changed. Hellion Wei didn't wait for her to speak and laughed. "It seems like she really did die. Just now, I used my phone to search for your school while I was walking. The web page didn't show any students in your school who had jumped off a building. Then the question is, who died? Do you know?" "I'm not sure. Could it be that someone blocked the news?" Tauzi said in a low voice, "There are some things that I can't say too clearly. You should know that the school will take some measures in this regard. Otherwise, if the news is leaked to the media, the school will also be affected." Hellion Vivian put away her phone. "You're right, but I thought you would know. After all, the person who died was your professor's wife." As soon as Hellion Vivian said that, Tauzi trembled. Then, she asked in fear, "Are you saying that the person who looked for me was her? What do you think?" Hellion Vivian didn't answer but asked instead. Tauzi's expression didn't show anything. She only looked at Hellion Vivian with tears in her eyes. "You have to save me. You have to help me deal with her." "Of course." Hellion Vivian answered very professionally. "Our Taobao shop has always been honest. But there is one thing that you seem to have mistaken. Catching ghosts is catching ghosts, and helping people is helping people. I'm only responsible for catching ghosts when I accept your business." Tauzi didn't quite understand Hellion Vivian's words. But as long as she caught that woman, she should be safe. "Let's go." Hellion Vivian glanced at the moon not far away. "Go to the place with the strongest yin qi and wait for her to appear." Tauzi was scared. "Do I have to go?" "If you don't go, she will directly possess you at 12 o'clock. Hellion Vivian's voice was very faint. Tauzi covered her face as if she was crying. Why do these ghosts still harm people after death? Chapter 10:14. Because there's resentment. Hellion Vivian turned around and glanced at her. As long as the resentment is strong enough, even if you don't devour evil spirits, you can still use the price of your reincarnation to exchange for a chance to take revenge in the underworld. Don't you know this? Tauzi shook her head, and her expression became more and more unsightly. This was the first time she had heard of such a thing in the underworld. Hellion Vivian smiled faintly. It's understandable that you don't know. After all, there aren't many evil spirits that are so persistent. With that, Hellion Vivian turned her face and said directly to Beligaju, "You lead the way?" For a demon, it was a piece of cake to find the place with the strongest energy. Not to mention that this demon was Beligaju. It turned out that there was an abandoned laboratory in the school. No supernatural incidents had occurred in this laboratory, but because it had not been used for a long time, few people went there. It was very dark everywhere. Even if there was a light, it would be on and off. When Hellion Vivian and the others walked in, there was no one around. Occasionally, a counselor would pass by, but he would only look at them suspiciously and did not stop them. The corridor of the laboratory was paved with tiles, which had an old-fashioned feel from the 1980s. Nowadays, in many places, only some elementary schools would use such tiles. Any higher education institution would have a clean and shiny floor, unlike this laboratory building. The paint on the walls had almost fallen off. There were no aluminum doors, only the most primitive dark wooden doors. The iron locks hanging on them were even rusted. It seemed that there was a reason why no one was allowed to enter this place. Generally, this kind of building, even if there were no dirty things, would accumulate a lot of energy. In addition, no one knew if there would be any unexpected situations, such as loose screws or power outages. Once a student entered, their safety could not be guaranteed. However, before Hellion Vivian came in, she also took a picture of it and sent it to Monkey. She asked Monkey to investigate. Although the energy in this laboratory building was very strong, it had always been considered peaceful. No unusual things had happened. Of course, there were also students who had fallen and injured themselves in the vicinity, but such trivial matters were not included in the calculation. Under normal circumstances, if a person walked alone in a place where chi was abundant, they would always be unlucky. Perhaps it was because it had not been used for a long time, but the entire laboratory building was filled with a moldy smell. Hellion Vivian purposely lowered her head to look at the corners of the corridor. Some places had already grown green moss. The more moss there was in a place, the more energy there was. Tauzi was so scared that she wanted to grab Beligaju's sleeve with her fingers. But every time, the man would coincidentally avoid her. Tauzi had no choice but to look around, fearing that something unknown would appear behind or on both sides of her. Don't look around, Hellion Vivian reminded her again. Look in front of you. Since you were able to search for my shop on the internet, you should have done some research in this area. When a person walks at night, there are 3 young flames on his body, one on his left, one on his right, and one on his back. Every time you look, one of the young flames will be extinguished. When all 3 flames are extinguished, the evil spirit will appear. Of course, Tauzi understood this. She did not know what the corridor looked like in Hellion Vivian's eyes, but in her eyes, the light in front of her was blurred. She kept feeling that there was a shadow there, but when she looked carefully, there was nothing. She did not know who had hung a shirt outside. When the wind blew, it looked like someone was jumping down from the 2nd floor. Tauzi's heart skipped a beat. Her palms and back were covered in sweat. She did not dare to look anymore. She closed her eyes tightly and quickly followed Hellion Vivian's footsteps. Before they got too close to the toilet, the smell that hit them made Beligaju frown. Hellion Vivian knew that he was a clean freak, so she did not waste time. She flicked her kasaya and chanted the Buddhist scriptures. In just a moment, all the messy things hidden on the 1st floor revealed themselves. Tauzi looked at the black hair that was crawling over to her feet and screamed. She wanted to run, but Hellion Vivian pulled her back. Didn't I tell you before you came in? Don't leave my sight. Hellion Vivian looked at her indifferently, but she put more strength in her hands. Tauzi realized with a lingering fear that the figures that appeared did not come toward them. Instead, they stood in front of them. Some of them were in the corner and some were in the middle of the corridor. Their faces were livid, and there was no trace of expression. They were like puppets with strings pulled, floating back and forth. Their bodies were wet, as if they had just been fished out of the water. Why are there so many of them? Tauzi grabbed Hellion Vivian's arm. Since the man did not allow her to grab, she could only grab the female shop owner. Hellion Vivian glanced at her. Because a person's resentment affected them, causing the people who were supposed to be reincarnated to become bound spirits. Tauzi seemed to have some understanding of this. When she heard the words bound spirits, her thin lips turned white. Is it that serious? Don't underestimate a woman, whether she is alive or dead. After Hellion Vivian finished speaking, she looked at the bound spirits and asked in a calm voice, "Where is she?" The bound spirits did not have the ability to speak. The reason why they were bound was because they had not seen the messengers of hell. Therefore, many people did not know that they were already dead. Their thoughts were stuck on why they could not walk out of this laboratory building. Sometimes, people would hear strange noises coming from upstairs. That was because some ghosts who had not reached the 7th day were wandering around. After these bound spirits died, they were attracted to the laboratory building by the resentment and became a part of the building. Unless they could find the ghost that created the resentment, they wouldn't be able to leave this place even if they tried to find the ghost that created the resentment. After hearing Hellion Vivian's words, the bound spirits, who seemed to have slow reactions, slowly looked in the same direction. It was the second floor. That ghost was on the second floor. Hellion Vivian quickly understood their meaning. She lowered her voice. "Let's go up." "Still wanna go up?" Towsy trembled. Her legs were weak. Why don't we go back and come back at dawn?" Chapter 10:15. Hellion Vivian said unhurriedly, "Ghosts also have a schedule. They are sleeping at dawn. Where can I find them? But if we go up, it will be difficult for us to come down." Towsy really hoped that Hellion Vivian would give up on the idea of going up. After all, it was land below. If anything happened, they could just run out. But if they went upstairs, where could they run to? Upon hearing this, Hellion Wei stopped. "I charge based on the night. Every time you appear on stage, you will have to pay an additional fee. Of course, you can also choose to stop the process this time. However, you will face two outcomes. One is that the evil spirit will appear on your body again at 12 o'clock, which is 1.5 hours later. The second is that I will appear on stage again tomorrow, and the fee will be doubled. I think you will care more about the first outcome." Towsy really did care about the first result. She couldn't go on like this. She couldn't bear it even for one day. When she woke up in the morning, she didn't know what she did last night, nor where she went. She didn't even know who she saw. "Don't stop the process. Let's go up." Towsy clenched her fists and finally made a decision. Hellion Vivian and Beligaju still walked forward, but Towsy was scared, so she suggested in a hoarse voice, "Can I walk in between the two of you? Shop owner, don't you know how to exorcise ghosts? You shouldn't be afraid of these dirty things. Can you let your assistant walk behind me?" Beligaju raised his eyebrows, and an extremely cold light appeared in his deep eyes. Towsy didn't know that that gaze was even scarier than any evil spirit here. The demon's displeasure was always elegant and bone-chilling. Hellion Vivian glanced at Beligaju. "You go to the back. Customers come first." "Yes, my beautiful master." His Highness seemed to be addicted to this game. He gently bit Hellion Vivian's ear, put her on the ground, and walked to the back of the line. With Beligaju at the back, Towsy felt much safer. With Hellion Vivian leading the way, she would be in the least danger if something went wrong. Because the entire laboratory building was too quiet, the sound of footsteps was particularly loud. The second floor was indeed darker than the first floor, but it was not as humid. Just as Towsy relaxed, she heard Hellion Vivian's voice again. "Miss Towsy, you really don't know this evil spirit?" Towsy's eyes flickered. "I've seen him, but I haven't spoken to him. After all, he's not our professor. He's just a family member." "A family member of the professor?" Hellion Vivian chuckled. "I don't like lies." Towsy was a little angry when she heard this. "Shop owner, you're here to catch ghosts, not to pry into other people's privacy. Any ghost has a reason to find a human." Hellion Vivian looked up at her. "Do you understand? She wouldn't appear here for no reason. She even gave up her chance of reincarnation just to possess you. Besides, you've known her from the beginning, haven't you? Otherwise, you wouldn't have used the word her when we first talked." Towsy's fingers froze. "Yes, I know her, but I don't understand why she keeps pestering me. I didn't kill her. Why does she keep pestering you?" Hellion Wei glanced at Towsy. The Buddhist prayer beads that were entwined around her body moved, emitting a faint light of Buddha. "Because you already have a ghost pact on you, which means that you have made a pact with her. When you made the pact, you probably didn't know that the other party was her. However, in the two realms of yin and yang, as long as one party makes a wish and the other agrees, it means that the pact has been fulfilled." Towsy was confused. "What contract? I've never done anything like that. I don't even have a pen spirit." Towsy suddenly paused. "I did make a wish, but I didn't do anything at that time. When I passed by the teaching building, I saw a senior who was 1 year older than me, so You wanted to get your senior's attention. To put it bluntly, you wanted to have him. Helian Wei Wei's voice was very indifferent. That boy should be very outstanding in your school and should already have a girlfriend. However, you were unwilling to accept it. You always felt that the other girl was not worthy of him at all, so you made a wish. After that, you did get that boy, but when night came, you started to not be yourself anymore. Even that boy is starting to suspect you now. Isn't that right? Tao Zi's eyes shook. How did you know? I can see it from your personality and eyes. Helian Vivian chuckled. As for the rest, it's related to what you've done before. For example, why are you so afraid of this female ghost? Tao Zi grabbed her long hair. Her pale face looked gentle and pure. She wants me to die, and she wants to replace me. Since you can guess so many things, why don't you take her in immediately? I'll take her in. Helian Vivian smiled again. Since you don't want to say it, let her tell me in person. As soon as she finished speaking, Helian Wei Wei's Kasaya moved and a figure gradually appeared behind Tao Zi. After seeing the figure, Tao Zi was so scared that she fell to the ground. Her fingers trembled as she kept moving backward. The figure was about 50 years old. If Helian Vivian's mother was still alive, she would be about the same age. She looked at Tao Zi with a vicious gaze as if she was looking at garbage. Her body was emitting a black aura. Her face, which was no longer young, looked extremely gloomy. Her lips moved up and down like a black hole, and the sound she made was very eerie. That was nonsense, and people in the human world couldn't understand it. Helian Vivian waved her Kasaya again, and the words in the figure's mouth changed. I'm so blind to be so nice to you. It's not easy for a girl like you to go to school in another place. I made soup for you when you were sick, and I even asked Old Tan to take care of you more. But how did you treat me, your master's wife? Not only did you climb into Old Tan's bed, but when you did that kind of thing, you even deliberately called me and asked me to listen to you. At this point, the figure couldn't continue. Her eyes turned cold, and there was a heaven-defying hatred. Fortunately, God has eyes, and let me hear you making a wish. You want to steal someone else's man, so we'll fulfill your wish. Don't you like to sleep with people older than you? Then I'll let you sleep with me every day. Chapter 10:16. As the last sentence of the figure faded away, a voice rang out. The entire second floor of the laboratory building was filled with thick black fog. That was because the resentment was too deep and accumulated into hatred. Tao Zi's eyes were about to fall out of their sockets because of fear. She turned and ran toward the stairs. Her legs were so weak that she didn't dare to look back. But no matter how she ran, she couldn't reach the first floor. When she stopped, she looked up and returned to the original place. The two words second floor were dyed red with blood. Tao Zi was so scared that she completely collapsed. She looked at Helian Vivian and shouted, I've paid for it. Hurry up and take her away. Helian Vivian heard this and raised her eyebrows. She blocked with the prayer beads in her hand. The figure seemed to be trapped by something. She looked at Helian Vivian, full of murderous intent. I'll kill anyone who stops me from taking revenge. I don't want to do it because you're still young, but don't force me. You can't achieve the best revenge by doing this. Helian Vivian's words were always unexpected. The figure paused for a moment, then laughed eerily. Then how should I take revenge? How should I take revenge? This person took advantage of her young age and pretended to be pitiful to force me. Now that I'm dead, I can finally take revenge. I must let her have a taste of what it means to be in so much pain that she wants to die. I won't let you kill anyone. Helian Vivian only said this sentence from beginning to end. Because the figure couldn't move, blood flowed out of her eyes. She looked at Tao Zi like a lunatic, wanting to catch her. She knew that she didn't have much time. After today, she might not be able to take revenge anymore. Death wouldn't allow her to always be here to bind these Een spirits. Once the time was up, she would be annihilated. She had been hiding for several days, and she couldn't hide anymore. Originally, she wanted to exchange a life for a life. No matter what, she would kill this bitch. Even if she disappeared from this world, she wouldn't regret it. However, Human Shadow did not expect that this bitch would invite such a powerful exorcist. The silhouette knew that Hellion Vivian would not be able to defeat it. Instead, it turned around and flew towards Beligaju. This young man with mysophobia was obviously a young master with a good family background. Moreover, he looked a little thin. Most importantly, he couldn't sense any spiritual energy from him. For such an ordinary person, as long as she possessed his body, the exorcist would not be able to do anything to her. Unfortunately, the figure did not know that the man she had chosen was not ordinary. The reason why he looked so ordinary was because his exclusive soul was by his side. He could carry out the most perfect disguise, covering up all of the original devil chi. When the figure rushed towards Beligaju, Tauzi turned pale with fright. She was afraid that Beligaju would be possessed. Hellion Vivian's eyes narrowed, and her expression changed in an instant. Her short legs kicked hard, and she chased after the figure as fast as she could. Unfortunately, after she became small, her speed was slower, and her legs were shorter. In addition, the figure was closer to Beligaju than she was, so she couldn't catch up with the figure. The figure was baring its fangs and brandishing its claws. There were still bloodstains on its face. Anyone who saw it would tremble in fear. However, Beligaju stood calmly in a dark corner, coldly watching the figure approach. When the figure saw Beligaju standing motionless, she secretly laughed. She should have possessed this man from the beginning. She wouldn't have had to spend so much effort. However, when she was about to reach out and clamp the man, she suddenly felt a flash in front of her. That person disappeared before her eyes. It was so fast that it was unbelievable. The figure was stunned and subconsciously turned her head. The man who was in front of her a moment ago was now leaning against the wall with his arms crossed, looking down at her leisurely. His eyes were full of indifference, and behind him were, countless demons were surging out. You, who are you? The figure suddenly broke out in a cold sweat. How could this be an ordinary person? Which ordinary person would have the ability to make a group of demons obediently obey his orders? The figure still did not feel the devil chi on Beligaju, but she already realized that she had not provoked this inconspicuous man in front of her. There was no time to prepare for her escape. The figure watched as Beligaju did not even raise his hand. He just lifted his eyelids, and in an instant, she felt as if her blood was being torn apart. Ju, stop! Hellion Vivian moved sideways to block him. She looked at Beligaju and said, I'll handle this. Beligaju stopped attacking and chuckled. He reached out and hugged her. There was not the slightest hint of danger in his eyes. His thin lips leaned against Hellion Vivian's ear, and he said in that deep and pleasant voice, What should I do, my master? I can't refuse your requests anymore. Can you not always lean into my ear and talk to me? Hellion Wei's face was flushed red, but she was too small now, so her ability to resist was obviously weaker. She could only let His Highness do whatever he wanted. She tilted her head and said to the figure, It's not worth it to give up your chance of reincarnation for a mistress. I've also done some research on this lady's living situation. Just now, someone sent me a message saying that she's good at using her advantages to snatch men who are older than her. However, these men can't just do as she pleases, just like your family's old Tan. His willpower is so weak that he can be easily seduced. This kind of thing takes two hands to clap. You're only looking for the mistress for revenge. How could you forget about your family's old Tan? I can't get close to him. The figure's eyes were red. He found someone to burn my birth characters and asked for a jade Buddha to protect him. I can't do anything to him. Hellion Vivian looked at her. After a while, she smiled and said, This is the attitude of revenge. You won't let anyone go. Tauzi couldn't believe what she had heard. Wasn't that child hired by her to catch ghosts? Why did she encourage an old female ghost to take revenge? Are you kidding me? You were hired by me, not her. Tauzi was angry and scared. She probably knew that Hellion Vivian wouldn't help her. She turned to Beligaju and said, I beg you, brother. I beg you, please save me. She was still crying when she spoke, as if she wanted to arouse Beligaju's pity, who knew that Bailey Jiaju would laugh. He laughed very coldly. If you let me hear the word brother from your mouth again, I will cut off your tongue. This human's mind was really dirty from head to toe. How could she call him brother? Tauzi was stunned. She didn't expect that her trick would be useless. She was stunned with tears on her face. Chapter 10:17. On the other hand, Helian Wei Wei glanced at Tauzi. Her attitude was still the same as before, neither warm nor cold. I've told you that everything in our shop is fair and honest. The only thing I've accepted your order is to help you catch ghosts. As for what happens to you in the future, it's not part of our service. Then why aren't you doing it? Tauzi clenched her hands and screamed. Helian Vivian glanced at her with obvious mockery. I'll do it soon, and I'll let you see the whole process. After saying that, Helian Vivian looked at the figure filled with hatred. The situation now is obvious. You can't beat us. If you make a move, you'll only end up being reduced to ashes. Now, I'll give you two options. One is to fight. Two, I'll help you take revenge. Listen to my orders now and be converted by me on the spot. Help me take revenge. The figure naturally knew that she was no match for the other party. That man alone could turn her into a pool of blood in an instant. He didn't even do anything just now. Just by relying on his aura, he was able to completely suppress her. Even the death gods in hell didn't give her such a feeling. However, she was unwilling to give up. How can you help me take revenge? Humans are supposed to side with humans, not ghosts. Helian Vivian nodded and said in an indifferent tone, That's true under normal circumstances. However, your situation is a little special. I've never been particular about good and evil. Of course, it's understandable that you don't believe me. How about this? I'll first tell you how I can help you take revenge. See if you're satisfied with it. I have a record of Miss Tauzi sleeping with someone else. It was found by someone else. It was probably the first time Miss Tauzi had sex with your old Tan. It was accidentally recorded by the hotel's camera. The angle was very clear. In addition to the voice chat records you mentioned, with a little internet search technology, we can push Miss Tauzi and Old Tan out together. We'll let the whole school know what kind of people they are. I can't guarantee what the school will do to them, but don't worry, as long as they did it, I won't give them a chance to make a comeback. Think about it carefully. If you kill someone, not only will you not be able to reincarnate, even if she dies, no one will know what she did. You, on the other hand, have always been treated by the school as someone with mental disorder who came to stir up trouble. In fact, you just didn't handle this kind of thing properly. If a man has a mistress, he will very straightforwardly tell her to get lost. There was nothing to make a fuss about. Just because you didn't make a fuss didn't mean that you didn't do anything. You just had to reveal the truth. No matter what the result was, you just had to be happy in your heart. Don't make a fuss and don't make a fuss. A woman who was someone else's mistress wasn't worth lowering yourself to see her. She wasn't worthy. And a man who keeps a mistress isn't worth you continuing to be a fool. If there's a next life, you deserve a better man. Auntie, do you understand what I'm saying? The figure was stunned. Gradually, tears fell from her crimson eyes. She was not weak, nor was she afraid to get a divorce. However, in this world, she had once wanted to spend the rest of her life with that person. She couldn't bear to. The man who had once taken her hand from her father, led her in front of the priest, and put a ring on her finger, had betrayed her. The man who had held her hand with a nervous expression even when she had pricked it with a thorn. When did it become a habit for him to go home? He couldn't even see her heartache. She had been so good to this girl, but she had slept with her own husband. She couldn't figure it out. She was in so much pain that she couldn't sleep at night. When the girl said to her, "He doesn't have any passion when he's with you. Listen to what he's like when he's with you, and then look at what he's like when he's with you. You're an old woman in your 50s. Who would like you? People would probably think that you're disgusting, fat, and noisy when they stand together. Other than cooking and taking care of people, what else can you do? Perhaps what she had lost to wasn't anything. It was time. The figure lowered her eyes, and the resentment on her body faded away, leaving only endless pain. She was like all mothers of our age standing there. Perhaps she wasn't very beautiful, but she had a unique gentleness. Perhaps it was like what the girl had said, that she was a little chubby and had wrinkles at the corners of her eyes, but she wasn't disgusting. Hellion Vivian took a step forward and put her hand on her hand. It's not that you're not good enough. It's that these scumbags aren't worth the blood on your hands. Thank you. The figure smiled. It was as if all her fatigue had been burned away at this moment. When she reached the end of her life, she realized that her most unbearable past was that after knowing that the person had cheated on her, she still hoped that he would come back. She had never understood. Why did she have to be hurt by so many people when she lost him? Was it because she was old? She remembered what the girl's friend had said about her. It was exactly the same. Was she really old? She didn't understand why these girls would have such thoughts. It was as if it was natural to steal someone else's things. But when she saw Hellion Vivian, who was younger than the girl, the figure felt completely relieved. It turned out that many things had nothing to do with age. Some people could grow old together and some couldn't. Some girls liked to steal from others, and some were still young, beautiful, and self-loving. She didn't do anything wrong, but she had lost too badly in this relationship. She was so embarrassed that she almost lost her life, but others didn't feel anything. Perhaps it was because no one understood. When they heard someone say those words, that was why some feelings would break down. The figure reached out and took the little Hellion Vivian into her arms. She used a lot of strength, but she didn't have any intention of hurting Hellion Vivian. She just kept saying thank you. Hellion Vivian stopped Beligaju from coming over. She put her left hand on the figure's back and said in a low voice, "My mother, she also committed suicide. She was deeply depressed, and it was also because of a man's extramarital affair. At that time, I was still very young and didn't have any ability to save her. So now I want to save you. Don't do things like killing people. Once you start, there will be consequences. The people of Hades won't let you go. Leave the matter of Miss Towsy to me." Towsy, who was named, looked at Hellion Vivian with eyes full of resentment. "So in the end, you took my money, but you want to deal with me. I've never taken money from mistresses. Look at your own Alipay. I've never confirmed the receipt." Hellion Vivian's voice was very light, but the corners of her mouth curved into an evil smile. "But since you found my Taobao shop, I have to give you some user experience." Chapter 10:18. Towsy clenched her fists and said, "What mistress? She's a human and I'm a ghost. Can you use your brain? Also, I hate it when people call me mistress. Just because she met teacher first, does teacher have to spend his entire life with her? You don't have to spend your entire life with her." Hellion Vivian didn't show the slightest anger on her face. It's just that people like you don't understand what loyalty is in a relationship. No one will jump out and blame you if you steal someone else's. After all, scumbags and bitches usually appear in pairs. However, you shouldn't force someone into a dead end after doing something, not to mention that this person is an elder who cares about you. Towsy sneered, "Even if you're right, what does my life have to do with you? Indeed, it has nothing to do with me." Hellion Vivian smiled gently. "Didn't I say that you're my guest? I'll do what I should do, but I'll also do what I promised Auntie. All right, Casso, you've been there for a long time. Come out." As soon as Hellion Vivian's voice fell, a young man in a black suit walked out from the darkness. He was extremely handsome and had a wicked smile on his face. He carried a black scythe that was taller than a person on his shoulder. "Yo, I didn't expect to meet you here." Casso blinked his left eye and blew the stray hair on his forehead. "This place is really hard to find." When the figure saw him, he took a step back in fear. "Grim Reaper. All right, don't talk nonsense and let me hit you. If I don't kill you, my salary will be deducted by my master, King of Hell." Casso pointed the black scythe in his hand and pointed it directly at the figure. Helian Weiwei's figure moved and blocked in front of him. Casso raised his eyebrows. Phoenix, you can't do this. My legs are hurting from looking for this evil spirit. It wasn't easy for me to find her, but you still won't let me do it. This is against the rules. Helian Weiwei looked at him and said, Your mission is to get rid of her and release the bound spirits here, so that they can be reincarnated according to the normal order. However, even so, the aura of resentment here will not be eliminated. Similar situations will happen again in the future. By then, you will be the one who will be tired. Why don't I help you solve this problem? As long as the evil spirit is released, the aura of resentment here will disappear. Similarly, I have a request. What request? When Casso heard that she wanted to release the evil spirit, his whole body shook as if there was a tail behind him. One had to know that resentment had a significant impact on their work. The more resentment there was, the more work they had to do. Those spirits wouldn't be moved no matter what. If Phoenix could help him solve this problem, it would be best. Helian Vivian looked back at Towsy and the smile on her face became wider. Help me find this person's life history. She shouldn't be able to live for long. Casso tilted his head and looked at Towsy. She's a greedy person and has a heavy heart. This kind of person will often create many evil things and easily cause resentment. If there aren't any good deeds, I can come back in less than 20 years to cut off her soul. As Casso spoke, he took out a black notebook. Let me take a closer look. She likes to sleep with old men. There should be a source of infection in her body now. Although she will get married in the future, after she gets married, she will meet a crafty mother-in-law and her marriage life will be very unsatisfactory. Once a woman is infected with this disease, she will have buds all over her body after a month. Her husband couldn't stand it and simply left her with nothing. At that time, she was already in her 40s, more than 10 years older than her peers. Her death was very tragic and her whole body was emitting a terrible stench. Even her relatives didn't want to go near her. Furthermore, she had 2 abortions when she was young and didn't leave behind a child. This was her entire life in her later years. After Casso finished speaking, he closed the notebook in his hand and smiled faintly. Since there are still men who like this kind of woman, they must be blind. That's why humans are said to have a negative IQ sometimes. I'm also a human. Helian Vivian glanced at him. And Casso, you were also a human before you died, so don't make racial attacks. Casso shrugged and carried the scythe on his body. I'm not that retarded. I died early. If I died later and found a wife, if she was willing to spend the rest of her life with me and care about my body every day, I would never let her down, let alone be with a young girl. Don't you know? The most beautiful love is the moment I look up and see your head full of white hair. What I remember is the first time I saw you. You were like a young girl. If that day has not come, then there is no need to talk about love. I've received countless souls. Some of them are in front of the hospital bed. Their partners will take out their photos from time to time and look at them after sending them away. They will talk a lot. The older they are, the more they will understand that staying together until old age is more precious than anything else. I didn't know that you death gods can recite poems. Helian Vivian said lazily. Casso was very proud. Good men all know how to recite poems. Listening to the conversation between Helian Vivian and Casso, Towsy was about to go crazy. She covered her ears with both hands and shouted, What do you mean by growing old together? What do you mean by predicting my life? I don't believe it. It doesn't matter whether you believe it or not. Helian Vivian looked at her and smiled. Haven't you always been worried that I won't help you exorcise the ghost? I'll let Auntie reincarnate in peace now. As for you, don't worry, I don't like to kill people, and I don't have the right to decide who lives and who dies. I won't easily change anyone's fate. I let Casso out just to tell you that God is watching what people do. No one needs to interfere and God will take you. Towsy stared at Helian Vivian. Just like that, she couldn't breathe and fainted from anger. When she woke up again, many school leaders and students were surrounding her. At that time, it was already 6 o'clock in the morning. The laboratory building was like a brand new building. It was no longer humid like before, as if someone had finally let go of something. Even the roses outside the window bloomed into white flowers. From time to time, butterflies flew over. Towsy reached out and touched it. She heaved a sigh of relief. She knew that the old woman was really gone. She couldn't hurt her in the future even if she wanted to. Chapter 10:19. As for the strange words that the man in black said, she didn't even believe it. Did he really think that she didn't know? Even with the existence of the Hades, the Grim Reaper couldn't casually reveal someone's life. They were just trying to scare her. Towsy laughed in her heart. As usual, she hid the ins and outs of the matter well. Her face revealed a confused and pitiful expression. What happened yesterday? Why am I here? The school leaders and students looked at each other and didn't say anything. Only a female student helped Towsy up and said in a low voice, "Towsy, you need to be mentally prepared." Mentally prepared? Mentally prepared for what? Towsy frowned in confusion. The female student hesitated for a moment. Looking at the gazes of the people looking at them, she said in a low voice, "Everyone knows about you and Professor Tan." Towsy froze when she heard this. Before she could speak, the school leaders had already spoken. "Student Li Tao, right? If you don't have any major problems, we need to talk to you. From today onwards, Professor Zhang will be fired by the school. As for you, due to consideration of the negative impact of the school and the students' quality, we will first expel you from school. The information you posted has already been published on the school's Tieba. Now, the media is also involved in this matter. Many people are waiting for an explanation. Although the death of Professor Tan's lover isn't directly related to you, the indecent photos of you and Professor Tan have a very bad impact on the school's appearance. Therefore, we need to immediately deal with it. You can go home now. We will investigate this matter thoroughly later." "You can't do this," Towsy shouted. "Just because I had sex with a teacher, you want to fire me? On what basis? This is not in accordance with the legal procedures." This was indeed not in accordance with the legal procedures. Therefore, Towsy wasn't taken away that day. She continued to stay at the school. Just because the school didn't deal with it, it didn't mean that no one knew about it. Everyone looked at her differently from before. Many boys liked this kind of girl the most. She was good-looking, usually easy to get along with, and knew how to act coquettishly. When she met a boy she liked, she never hid it. Everyone thought that she was a good person, but in reality, she was more materialistic than anyone else. She had hooked up with Professor Tan. On one hand, she was really infatuated with a man of that age. On the other hand, he would buy her whatever she wanted. Furthermore, he was her professor. It was a win-win situation. In addition, she really didn't like that old woman. Didn't she just know old Tan earlier than her? Why was she able to live so comfortably with a car and a house? She was so young, but she had nothing? Towsy understood these men very well. When she interacted with them, the more she did not take money seriously, the more they would think that she was special and not a materialistic woman. For example, those women who really didn't care about money were already able to talk about bags, cars, and houses that represented materiality. Because in their eyes, there was nothing to be afraid of. However, in the eyes of men, her disguise was charming and different from the rest. Those who didn't disguise themselves would be seen as wastrels. Towsy had used this ability to win over Old Tan. She believed that until now, Old Tan still thought that she truly liked him as a person and only liked him as a person. Towsy was right. After this incident, the man with the surname Tan didn't care about anything else. After finding Towsy, he held her hand and said, "I'll be good to her for the rest of my life." At that time, Towsy already knew that Old Tan had been fired by the school because of this incident. In addition, it had caused a huge commotion. Even in the future, Old Tan's employment would not be too smooth. This was because once such a thing happened to a teacher, it meant that they had no fate with the education industry for the rest of their lives. Old Tan, who was not a professor, was not attractive to Towsy at all. In addition to his sorry state when he came, he had completely become a 50-year-old man who had failed. How could Towsy follow him? She pushed him away. Are you kidding me? Who wants to spend the rest of their lives with you? Old Tan seemed to have never expected her to say this. He still refused to give up. Do you care about how others look at you? Don't worry. I'm already divorced. I can marry you immediately. Marry me? What are you going to marry me with? The car and house that the school gave you have all been taken away. All you have left is that shabby house. With these shabby things, you still want to marry me? Tauzi was afraid that there would be trouble, so she spoke more bluntly. To tell you the truth, I can't stand that kind of pain. In order to prevent people from gossiping in the future, it's better for you to appear less in front of me. Old Tan still couldn't believe that this was the considerate girl he knew. He kept asking Tauzi if she had any difficulties. Tauzi was annoyed by his questions. Seeing that there was no one around, she revealed her true colors. Do you not understand fucking human language? Do you have to make me fall out with you? You can't even protect yourself now. What ability do you have to give me happiness, old thing? Hearing the words old thing, Old Tan felt as if he had been struck by lightning. His entire body stiffened and he was so angry that he started to tremble. At this moment, a chuckle sounded not far away. Ju, look, this is what you men are like. At this point, you're still looking for excuses for your mistress. You're really cheap to the bone. Baligaju also laughed. He landed on one knee and lifted Hellion Vivian's small hand with his black-gloved hand. Then, he lowered his eyes and kissed her gently. My master, you have to understand that not all men are as blind as him. Hey! Hellion Vivian was really not used to His Highness' current actions. Every time he would treat her like an exquisite doll. After kissing her, he would definitely lift her up and smile beautifully. He was really preparing to raise her like an animal. Hellion Vivian sighed helplessly. Her small appearance looked very cute. However, when her gaze landed on Old Tan, it was more indifferent. Auntie Lin asked me to bring you a message. She has been childhood sweetheart for more than 10 years and has lived after marriage for 30 years. She has never let you down. She hated you before, but now she doesn't hate you anymore because she won't meet you again in her next life. Even if she does meet you, she will only be a stranger. In the future, whether you are rich or poor, it will no longer have anything to do with her. She will also not enter your Tan family's ancestral grave because you have completely disgusted her. Chapter 1020. When Old Tan heard the last sentence, his body suddenly trembled. He looked at Hellion Vivian and said, No matter who you are, my relationship with her has long ended. What's there to be disgusting about? If she had agreed to divorce me earlier, things wouldn't have come to this point. I wouldn't have lost my qualifications as a teacher in school. Is that woman unwilling to let me go even if she dies? Now that I don't have anything, she'll be happy. She's really heartless and doesn't know what's good for her. Hellion Vivian sneered and said, Mr. Tan, aren't you thinking too highly of yourself? Miss Tauzi has already said that you're just an old thing. Do you think that other than Auntie Lin, who would really feel sorry for you? You said that Auntie Lin is heartless. If it wasn't for the fact that she wanted you to take the postgraduate entrance exam without any worries, she wouldn't have quit the job she had found and rode a broom cart to the road to sell breakfast every day. How do you think you have everything you have now? If it weren't for Auntie Lin, you would just be a poor boy who only knows how to study. Who is the heartless one? Ingrate, you've been childhood sweethearts for more than 10 years and have gone through thick and thin together for 30 weeks. You can't even compare to a mistress who wants to seduce you. You still have the face to mention your job title? What caused you to lose your qualifications as a teacher is your character and this Miss Tauzi who interferes in other people's families. Reality is already like this, and you still can't tell who is the one who is good to you. It seems that it's better for Auntie Lin to be dead than to be alive. She doesn't want to waste time by your side. How can there be a scum like you in this world? The education system should really think about who is more suitable to be a teacher. You. Old Tan was like a drowning dog. His hair was tied up, and the demeanor he was usually proud of was all gone. His finger trembled as he pointed at Hellion Vivian and said, Where did you come from? I'm warning you, I see that you're still young, so I won't lower myself to your level. What has our matters got to do with you? You're just eating carrots and worrying. If you have the time, you should take care of yourself. Don't be so talkative and meddle in other people's matters. It's simply ridiculous. Beligaju's eyes darkened. A loud bang was heard. It was unknown where the lightning came from, but it actually split the tree behind Old Tan in half. Old Tan's expression instantly changed. He was scared out of his wits. He pressed his left hand against his chest and patted it with all his might. Towsy was even more terrified when Hellion Vivian and the others appeared, because she knew very well that the reason why her matter was exposed was because of the other party's actions. Now, only Towsy would remember what the man in black said to her at the sight of Hellion Vivian. How could such a destitute life belong to her? She was so young and beautiful. She could find any man she wanted. As long as she got rid of the burden that was Old Tan, there would be plenty of people who would want her after graduation. However, even Towsy didn't know why, but it seemed that everything was progressing as the shop owner said, including the gifts she promised to give to that old woman. One of them was that she would ruin her and Old Tan's reputation. Inexplicably, Peach's hair began to stand on end again. She looked at Hellion Vivian, afraid that the other party would do something. However, Hellion Vivian didn't do anything. She only turned her body and stood in front of Beligaju. She looked at Old Tan and said, "You're right. This matter really has nothing to do with me. I only brought the words that Auntie Lin asked me to bring. As for the rest, whatever happens to Mr. Tan in the future will be his own doing. Of course, there's also Miss Tao." As soon as she finished speaking, Hellion Vivian glanced in Towsy's direction. Towsy shivered from her gaze and wanted to shake off Old Tan and leave. Now, the way her classmates looked at her was different from before. Although she wasn't expelled from school, she wasn't doing well. Old Tan's appearance wouldn't be of any help to her in the future. Instead, it was like a piece of smelly plaster. She had to shake him off. However, Old Tan couldn't see through Towsy's thoughts. He wanted to hold her back and didn't even look at Hellion Vivian and the others. It was as if the words that the people who had accompanied him for most of his life had brought him didn't matter at all. Beligaju's thin lips curled up as he watched this scene. He picked up the somewhat sad little phoenix and whispered, "He will regret it. In a while he will know how stupid he is. You're not allowed to kill." Hellion Vivian turned around and glanced at him. After turning small, her expression was very rich. Beligaju laughed. "Kill such a person? Wei, you look down on us demons too much. From an aesthetic point of view, killing such an old man would only be a disgrace to us. We only kill fresh flesh. This kind of person who emits the lowest level of filth, even Shangxia, who isn't picky about food, wouldn't take a second look at him, let alone me. Even if we were to eat, we wouldn't eat spoiled food." Hellion Vivian was speechless. "Then why did you say that he would regret it?" Beligaju's fingers traced Hellion Vivian's hair and touched the tip of her nose. "Demons can smell the scent of death. He's about to die." As soon as he finished speaking, a sound came from the other side. It turned out that Towsy's words had triggered Old Tan. Old Tan's heart disease had relapsed. His fingers grabbed Towsy and refused to let go. Towsy simply pushed him onto the stairs with all her might. Old Tan's head was broken and blood flowed all over the ground. He desperately wanted to get the medicine that had rolled to the side. However, the distance was a little far and he couldn't reach it at all. Old Tan looked at Towsy with bloodshot eyes, hoping that she could help him get the medicine. Who knew that Towsy would show an unprecedented disgust towards him? She said, "Old thing, it's good that you're dead." Then she ran into the dormitory. Old Tan panted and reached out to grab the clothes in front of his chest. He didn't know why, but he suddenly remembered that when he had his first heart attack, the woman who was afraid that something would happen to him and cooked soup for him. He chased her out of the house. He was so tired that he wished that he could never see that old face again. He even hated that she liked to talk to him when she was eating. He felt that that was a reflection of a person's lack of upbringing. He hated that calloused hand even more. It really made him lose his appetite. However, he had forgotten that without that pair of hands, he would have nothing. He would have even walked into the door of death long ago. No one knew how regretful Old Tan was. He looked at the sky and began to cry. He couldn't breathe at all. Fortunately, someone passed by and helped him call for an ambulance. However, Hellion Vivian saw the ghost servants that emerged from the darkness and followed Old Tan like a shadow. Chapter 1021. You saw them a long time ago? Hellion Vivian asked in a questioning tone. But her tone was very certain. Beligaju smiled faintly as he lifted her up and kissed her. Those reapers didn't dare to approach us because we were here. As long as that man was 10 meters away from us, they would naturally take his life. The reapers who were still walking in front of them all burst into tears. You also know how big of a danger you are to society. Also, we clearly didn't dare to approach because of you. Why did you drag Lord Phoenix into this? Lord Phoenix, I beg you. Hurry up and bring this guy home. Perhaps it was because Hellion Vivian really understood the pitiful eyes of the reapers. She did bring His Highness home. However, because she had not recovered yet, she called in advance and was relieved to know that both her sons had gone to school. On the other side of the phone, Monkey asked her why she hadn't gone to the old car dealership for the past 2 days. Hellion Vivian said, I've been busy with the night business recently. Then, she dismissed him. After all, no matter how bold Monkey was, he would tremble at the thought of his boss doing the ghost-catching business at night. Although she didn't make much money from this mission, she still had something to gain from expiating an evil spirit. The first thing Hellion Vivian did when she returned to the villa was to take out the ruler she had bought to measure her height. After confirming that she had really grown 5 centimeters, she happily took out all the pencils and prepared to lie on the table to copy the scriptures. Beligaju looked at her seriously wearing a kasaya, and the smile on his face never disappeared. As a person who was evil from the beginning to the end, His Highness was naturally not satisfied with Hellion Vivian throwing him aside. Without thinking, he hugged Hellion Vivian, who was still copying the scriptures, from behind. His right hand, which was wearing a black glove, lifted Hellion Vivian's left hand that was holding a pencil. He pretended to be deep in thought for a while and said, Your nails are a little long, it's inconvenient for you to write. Thus, before Hellion Vivian could react, His Highness picked her up and started cutting her nails. When the sun shone through the leaves, speckles of light fell on the side of Beligaju's face. He was always so handsome that it was irresistible. Hellion Vivian only felt that this position was particularly strange. She was being carried around like a child, even though she was clearly starting to grow taller. Just cut my nails. Do you have to hug me like this? Hellion Vivian muttered, her small face blushing. Beligaju was close to her, so he could kiss her ear if he tilted his head. Of course, I have to hold you. Otherwise, what if I cut your finger? Hellion Vivian. That was clearly not the reason. However, when His Highness cut Hellion Vivian's nails, he was indeed very gentle and meticulous. Every movement seemed to have been perfectly measured. She didn't feel the slightest bit of pain. Hellion Vivian originally thought that she would be able to copy the scriptures after cutting her nails. She even very encouragingly tied up her long hair and was prepared to work until nightfall. Who would have thought that Bailey Jiaju would be so competent as to bring over a small set of pajamas? The pajamas were obviously just custom-made according to Hellion Wei Wei's current height. The pure white sleeves were matched with 2 plush ears. It's time for an afternoon nap. My dear master, you should go to sleep. Beligaju picked up Hellion Vivian, intending to personally change her clothes for her. Unfortunately, before Phoenix grew up, she would always wear that kasaya. Bailey Jiaju narrowed his eyes dangerously. Then, he carried Hellion Wei Wei in his arms, as if he had given up. He hugged her and laid her down in the coffin. Since you can't change your clothes, let's just sleep. No, I still have to copy the scriptures. Otherwise, Buddha will think that I'm not sincere enough. After Hellion Vivian returned to being Phoenix, she was still very stubborn in certain aspects, mainly because she desperately wanted to grow taller. Beligaju looked at his empty arms and stood up without thinking. Then, he glanced at the ghosts outside the coffin. Those ghosts seemed to have understood His Highness' intention in minutes and began to stir up trouble. Lightning flashed and thunder rumbled. Hellion Vivian looked at the suddenly darkening sky and was stunned for a while. Then, she stood up and ran into the coffin to turn on the light. Just as she was about to sit down and seriously copy the scriptures, the electricity stopped, and everything was dark. This time, she really had no choice but to drag the pillow and walk to Beligaju. "Are you going to take an afternoon nap?" "It's a bit late for an afternoon nap now, but I can hug you and talk to you." Beligaju smiled calmly. Hellion Wei suspected several times whether or not these things were done by him, but looking at a certain highness expression, she felt that she was probably thinking too much. In short, the two of them lay down in the black coffin again. Beligaju hugged the person in his arms with satisfaction. The tip of his tall nose rubbed against her jade-like neck. "You smell like milk. I'll wash your hair tonight. My beautiful master should smell good from head to toe." "Stay away from me." Hellion Vivian's body was still in the growth stage. Being treated like this was always very sensitive. Even her tailbone was a little numb. Beligaju liked to see her like this. He pressed Hellion Vivian's back and then kissed the top of her head. "Don't move. Your body can't handle me right now." Hellion Vivian couldn't be more shameless than a certain person. Her face was slightly red, so she let him do whatever he wanted to her. Probably because she was still growing, Hellion Wei fell asleep after a short while. She was snoring in her sleep. Her fair and tender little belly was exposed outside, which was very cute. Beligaju also closed his eyes. With Hellion Vivian in his arms, with his long legs, he didn't look like the great demon that everyone was afraid of. Instead, he was so clean and handsome that people only wanted to look at him more carefully. His eyelashes were very long and thick. His entire body was noble and cold. The ghosts wandering outside finally let out a sigh of relief. It had to be known that when His Highness narrowed his eyes, the water and electricity of the entire villa started to be cut off. If Wang Fei continued to copy scriptures and ignore him, the entire city would suffer. Fortunately, Wang Fei obediently slept with His Highness. Otherwise, the ghosts looked at each other and shook their heads with lingering fear. Hellion Vivian slept very well. When she woke up, she could see a certain His Highness face. She tilted her head and looked for a while. Then she pulled the blanket over and wanted to cover Beligaju, who knew that when she moved, she found that something was different. That's right, it was different. Her hand. Chapter 1022. Hellion Vivian felt as if all her rationality had been knocked out of her body along with his movements. Those who had never experienced such a feeling would probably never understand. All of her senses had been sucked away. She could only close her eyes and wrap her arms around his neck as he brought her to the peak step by step. But she didn't know that it was because of this one action of hers. Beligaju suddenly sped up. He pinched her slender, white, and soft waist, half fiercely and half softly coaxing. Wei, listen to me. Don't let go. Let me take you properly. Then be gentler." In the end, Hellion Wei still couldn't resist. She lightly bit her lip and opened her mouth. Her long hair was stained with moisture, just like a flower that had been ravaged when it first bloomed. No matter what, it would only make people want her even more. Beligaju did the same. He carried her and sat down, letting her sit in his arms. As he whispered in her ear that he would be gentler, he fiercely pressed her against him. When he kissed her neck, he didn't forget to tell her how hot and comfortable it was inside. In this aspect, Hellion Vivian was clearly no match for Beligaju. Her arms and legs were red from the rubbing, and a single touch would cause a string of numbness to rise. The lingering lingered for more than 2 hours. Hellion Vivian's body went limp as a certain someone carried her to the bathtub. The things in the villa were the most exquisite, and even the bathroom was very big. It was hard to imagine that one day, that high and mighty person would wear a black suit and kneel on the floor with one knee, just to wash the person in the bathtub clean. The way he rubbed her waist was so gentle that it was hard for her to refuse. Hellion Vivian was already out of strength, but she wasn't as useless as before. She just needed time to recover. Beligaju looked at her and couldn't help but lower his head, landing a kiss on her trembling eyelashes. "Is the temperature of the water okay?" Hellion Vivian opened her eyes and saw the way he served her. Beligaju looked like a demon deacon from a manga. Even the smile on his face was so gentle that it was charming. "Sure enough, you're still too tired, aren't you?" Beligaju pressed his fingers on her waist, looking rather self-reproachful. "I'll be gentler next time." Hellion Vivian gritted her teeth. "I'll be damned if I believe you." She had begged him just now, but it only aroused his perverted possessiveness. "My master." Beligaju grabbed Hellion Vivian's right hand with his gloved left hand and kissed it gently. "How can you not trust your loyal dog?" "Dog?" Hellion Vivian blinked. "Where? Don't you know? Any demon is the most loyal dog in front of an exclusive soul." When Bailey Jiaju lowered his eyes, his eyelashes would be excessively long, making him look extremely handsome and harmless. "So, my master, you can ask me to do anything for you, anything that you like." Hellion Vivian reached out and patted his face. "As long as you're happy, it's fine. I like you very much when you're happy. Understand? And I'm finally showing my domineering side. That's it. I can't lose in terms of momentum. But, can you go away for a while first? I need to put on my clothes." Beligaju heard this and smiled slowly. "How can I let my master do this kind of thing? Leave it to me, I'll help you." "No!" Hellion Vivian still understood him very well and shook her head strongly. "I'll put it on myself." Beligaju's fingers paused, and his eyes were bitter. "You mean as long as I'm happy?" "Hellion Vivian, why do I feel like I've fallen into a wolf's pit again? Don't use the handsome man trick on me." Hellion Vivian refused to accept it. "This time I have to put on my own clothes. And in the future, without my permission, you're not allowed to casually touch me again." If he touched her again, who knew what would happen? There was no other way. A certain someone was too familiar with his own body. She had no way of resisting him at all. After Beligaju heard Hellion Vivian's words, his eyes darkened. For a demon, the orders of an exclusive soul had to be completely carried out. But to make him not touch her again? "I'm sorry, my lovely master. How could that kind of thing be done?" Beligaju's eyes flickered, and there was another burst of thunder outside. The ghostly shadows immediately sensed something and gathered together, trembling in fear. "His Highness is angry, he's definitely angry. Then what do we do? It's already dark now, unlike during the day. We can still block him if he's angry. What can we do? Hurry up and think of a reason. Who else can it be? A bunch of idiots. It must be because of the princess." The ghosts guessed right. Beligaju's mood change was indeed because of Hellion Vivian, but it wasn't because he was angry. In the depths of Beligaju's heart, he had thought countless times about the possibility of him trapping her in the Tao of Heaven and taking her for himself. It was nothing more than just like now, when she warned him not to touch her again. But back then, she might have looked at him with disgust and coldness. Although she was indulging him now, Beligaju still didn't like this kind of order. He wanted to touch this person at all times. Since she gave the order, he couldn't disobey. Then he could only use other methods to make her take the initiative to touch him. When Beligaju thought of this, his expression immediately changed, and the corners of his mouth turned into a smile that wasn't a smile. "Oh, can't you pretend to be pitiful anymore? Of course, do you think I'll always be fooled?" Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows and looked at him, looking very beautiful. Beligaju tapped his lips with his slender fingers. "Then what if I really become your pet dog?" "What do you mean?" Hellion Vivian paused. Why did she feel like she wasn't on the same channel as a certain highness? Beligaju didn't answer her, but stood up and took 2 steps back, his straight legs looking perfect. A black fog was emitted from his body, and there was a bang. The handsome man in the black suit shrunk to look 1 or 2 years younger than Hellion Vivian. It was as if he had returned to the young man from back then. But this time, the young man had 2 silver-white ears on his head, and his whole body was soft and noble, making people want to hug him when they saw him. Hellion Vivian's eyes immediately lit up. When she was still a little monk, when she saw Beligaju, the young man was a little older than this, but at that time she already thought that if Beligaju had a pair of ears, he would definitely be very, very cute. Not to mention, the current Beligaju was at most 13 years old, and he had a pair of erect ears and a silver tail that swayed back and forth. She really wanted to hug him in her arms. What to do? Chapter 1023. My master. Are you satisfied with my current appearance? Bailey Jiaju chuckled softly. He even adjusted his voice. Although it sounded cold, there was an indescribable sweetness in it. Hellion Vivian couldn't resist this kind of cute thing the most. She suddenly remembered that when she made a contract with Beligaju for the first time, he was still trapped in the ancient book. That was his most demonic soul fragment, and it was very bewitching. At that time, she didn't fall for it, but now all his soul fragments combined into a whole, and he became like this. Hellion Vivian couldn't resist at all. Beligaju's mouth slightly curved, and he deliberately pricked up his ears. Hellion Vivian couldn't help it this time, and directly hugged him in her arms. She was so beautiful. I'm very satisfied. You can go out with me like this today. Yes, my master. Beligaju increased his strength with a smile on his face, feeling every inch of her warmth, and gently raised his lips. He was very clear about what form to show at what time, but he hadn't been like this for a long time. At that time, he had just been born from chaos. The first thing he learned was disguise. Whether it was humans or demons, when facing cute things, they would always lower their guard. He relied on this natural appearance to lure food closer little by little, and then tore them apart. Except for Sakya and the King of Hell, very few people had seen his appearance at that time. Because this cute appearance only lasted for 40 days, he learned a more perfect disguise. She was elegant and noble, an existence that both the gods and Buddhas feared. Demons naturally knew how to win people's hearts. Not to mention the black-bellied Beligaju. But in this world, except for Hellion Vivian, there was no one else who could make this man willing to return to his original appearance. There was no one who didn't like Beligaju in this form. Hellion Vivian hugged a certain highness who was shorter than her, and felt that her heart was about to melt. She didn't care about him not touching her. But this wasn't Beligaju's ultimate goal. He wanted Hellion Vivian to take back that order. But a certain highness had always done things deeply. When dealing with a phoenix who was as vigilant as a fox, he had to give her enough sweetness. Beligaju allowed Hellion Vivian to touch his ears, and he didn't get angry. The tip of his nose rubbed Hellion Vivian's face, a little like trying to please her. But in fact, he just wanted to better take advantage of her. Hellion Vivian didn't notice Beligaju's thoughts, but she still pushed Beligaju away. Her eyes lit up as if she thought of something. Wait. Bailey Jiaju's dark eyes narrowed when he saw the duck that was about to fly away from his mouth. When he raised his head again, there was already a harmless smile on his face. Okay, I have to take a picture of you, Hellion Vivian mumbled as she started to look for her phone. Oh, Bailey Jiaju replied. He raised his eyebrows but didn't say anything. He just smiled. Hellion Vivian turned on the camera function and excitedly started to take a picture of a certain highness's ears. But just as she pressed the button, there was a screech. The phone screen turned black, and the rest of the appliances also rang. Hellion Vivian was dumbfounded. I just bought this phone. It's just a brick. Bailey Jiaju strolled over, his eyes filled with light. What's more, don't you want to enjoy me all to yourself? His voice was very languid, and when the last syllable jumped, it was like a cat scratching gently. Hellion Vivian thought carefully. If she took a picture of Beligaju, it might really cause unnecessary trouble in the future. But she still wanted to take a picture. As if he saw through Hellion Vivian's thoughts, Beligaju's deep eyes lit up. If you want to see it in the future, I'll show it to you. Why leave a picture? Since he already knew that she had no resistance to his appearance, he would naturally make good use of it. That was why his little phoenix was still a little too inexperienced. However, her actions reminded him of something. Perhaps in a while, he could use his phone to take more pictures of her sleeping and then blackmail her. He couldn't be blamed for thinking so much. It was really her order that made him very angry. Hellion Vivian still didn't know what Beligaju was thinking. She reached out and touched his ears again. I want to see it and you'll change? Without any additional conditions? Of course not. Beligaju knew that she was smart. Even now, she was still wary. He slowly dug a hole for her. Look, I showed you this time. I didn't add any additional conditions, did I? Hellion Vivian stared at his face for a few seconds. I still feel that something is wrong. You really don't have any other purpose? Why do you think so? Beligaju's voice sounded very gloomy, but his ears drooped. Am I not good enough? Hellion Vivian was a little embarrassed by his appearance. Did she really measure the heart of a gentleman with her own mean measure? Cough. Hellion Vivian coughed softly and reached out to hug him. She felt that it was really nice to hug someone softly. She also felt that his ears would sweep across her cheeks from time to time. She hesitated and began to compromise. If you don't like it, I won't take pictures. When ordinary people heard this sentence, they would basically forget about it. But His Highness was never an ordinary person. Demons were best at pretending to be obedient after taking advantage of others. Beligaju rubbed his ears against Hellion Vivian's face. There was an indescribable loneliness in his expression. It's not about taking pictures or not. I just don't understand why you don't believe me. Hellion Vivian was even more ashamed. It's my fault. I just asked casually. I always felt that it was too easy. Like I said, you are my master now. Beligaju raised his head and looked at her with deep eyes. He began to retreat in order to advance. If you want to take pictures for me, I won't stop you. I just want you to trust me more. Hellion Vivian really didn't understand. It was just a simple matter of taking pictures. How could it become such a serious topic of trust? However, seeing that His Highness was so serious, Hellion Vivian didn't dare to be negligent. She immediately expressed her opinion. I absolutely trust you. Beligaju hugged the person in his arms and buried his face in her long hair. His ears trembled as he tried to hold back his laughter. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.